Chapter 151. The Alchemist's Struggle. Bang! An alchemist hammered the table hard with his right fist and shouted to the other alchemists around him. Isn't it that we have a huge advantage? Can we bring the nobles to our side? How come we have brought the entire tribunal down? Forget it, just dragging the Inquisition into trouble. What about the nobles? Where is their support? He threw the pen in his hand on the table and yelled loudly. After working for so long and spending so much money? What's the result? In the end, we ended up with a bunch of useless people who couldn't even lift the blockade of the workshop. Although the city defense army was pushed to the side of the alchemists, this does not mean that the nobles will support them. After all, they are not fools and have no benefits. How can they really go against the Inquisition? As for the city defense army, that's not easy. Just find an excuse to be transferred out of Ginza, or just take a leave of absence. If the Inquisition hadn't all come to an end, they wouldn't mind buying a good one and saying a few innocuous words. However, after rumors spread and the tribunal was really put to an end, they would not really confront the tribunal for a group of alchemists. Recalling the tactful rejection words he used to make friends with nobles in the past, he was so angry that he gritted his teeth. When I first came to ask for the alchemy potion, I had a lot of nice things to say. I really wanted to help, but I didn't even want to say anything. Hey, do you really think I'm going to lose this time? In his mind, he cursed those ruthless nobles. As for the fact that when these nobles came to ask for potions, he had defrauded them of a large sum of money, he selectively ignored them. After a few venting curses, he looked at the other alchemists in the room and said in a serious tone. Let's talk about it. What should we do next? The other alchemists in the room looked at each other and fell silent. Although the alchemist circle relies on its semi-monopoly on alchemical potions, it is relatively wealthy. Moreover, relying on the various connections he has accumulated, the alchemist can also get a lot of conveniences in Ginza on weekdays. However, if compared with the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition, they have almost no advantage. In terms of wealth, they are wealthier than the Radiant Knights. Although the Radiant Knights have many manors, land, various workshops, and caravans all over the Silver Empire. However, most of them are difficult to reserve and are basically invested in the operation of the knights and charity business. Although they earn a lot, they also spend a lot, and the funds at their disposal are generally not as good as those of an alchemist. However, if you include the behemoth of the Inquisition, they are completely incomparable. As for personal connections, well, they used to be able to rely on monopoly, but they cheated a lot of people. Although these people were smiling, it was hard to say what they were thinking in their hearts. If it's the icing on the cake, they don't mind helping. However, under the current situation, except for a few forces with interests tied to each other, if others want their help, they will have to cut their flesh. If the meat needs to be cut, who will do it? Thinking of this, the alchemists in the room looked unhappy. Speak, weren't you able to speak well before? Are you mute now? The alchemist who was leading the meeting scolded. Seeing that no one spoke up, he looked around the room and began to call names. Louis, please say a few words first. Louis was stunned for a moment when he was called, and subconsciously pointed at himself with his finger. The alchemists around him also quickly spread around, and in the blink of an eye, an open space appeared around him. Don't be dazed, I'm talking about you. The leading alchemist shouted loudly. Quickly think of a way to kill Roland for me. Hey? I hit Roland? Is it true or not? Hearing his words, Louis's eyes widened, his tone full of disbelief. Although he usually likes to have oral pleasure, he is still a bit obsessive. As a weak alchemist, he couldn't even defeat a 4th-level spellcaster, let alone a suspected high-level spellcaster like Roland. It is estimated that with a high-level spell, he could die on the spot. Under the gazes of the other alchemists in the room, Louis was sweating a little. He opened his mouth and tried to change the subject. I think we should pay more attention to the issue of the Inquisition. There was no one before. It failed. After the rumors started, the Inquisition unilaterally refused to talk. An alchemist interrupted Louis. Well, I think maybe we can try again. It's impossible for all factions to refuse, right? Louis looked at everyone and said dryly. Just when Louis suggested awkwardly, a 1st-level alchemist suddenly burst into the room. Oh no, new news, the trial court has reached a conclusion. Before everyone in the room could scold the intruding alchemist, his panicked voice resounded throughout the room. What? Say it again. The leading alchemist shouted in shock. After hearing his words, the alchemist who came to deliver the news took a deep breath and repeated what he had just said. At the same time, he also handed over the new information in his hand and said, "This is the latest information received." The leading alchemist quickly took the message and quickly read it. As he flipped through it, his face became increasingly ugly. Bang! After reading it, he slammed the report on the table and shouted angrily. "Damn it, do you really think we are easy to bully? With such a big appetite, aren't you afraid of eating yourself to death?" While he was cursing the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition, other alchemists in the room also gathered around the table and read the new information on the table. While they were hesitating to find a way to deal with it, the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition quickly went through a series of procedures. Without their knowledge, the Inquisition made a judgment. All alchemy workshops in the workshop area were involved in serious harm to the health and life of Pantheon believers. The evidence is as follows: using inferior materials, concealing the side effects of alchemical potions, and the effects are different from the publicity. After comprehensive consideration by the tribunal, the verdict is as follows: confiscate all alchemical workshops and all related industries, and imprison the relevant personnel for 1 to several decades, or the death penalty. There are many contents, but to put it simply, the tribunal wants them to hand over all alchemical workshops and all supporting industries and workers, hand over all alchemical drawings, and pay a huge amount of compensation. The few dozen named will be imprisoned for several years, and the 2 most serious ones will be executed. If all of this is implemented, their alchemist circle can be directly disbanded. The order of chapters 148 and 149 is reversed. Chapter 152. As the title says. Updated in the evening, maybe only 2000. Chapter 153. The final judgment of the tribunal on the alchemists surprised almost all the forces that paid attention to this matter. This intensity of judgment is really a bit cruel, almost to wipe out the entire alchemist circle. However, although the tribunal has made a final judgment, it does not mean that they can really implement the judgment without any resistance. Under the ingenious power balance mechanism of Ginza and the Silver family, almost all forces in Ginza are wrapped in the power balance. Various rights are divided into several parts and distributed to various forces to ensure that any force can have checks and balances in Ginza, avoiding the emergence of any force that can challenge the order of the Silver family. At the same time, it also ensures that the struggle within Ginza is controlled within a limited range, ensuring long-term stability. The same is true for the tribunal. Although they have the power to enforce the law in Ginza, there are many forces that can confront them. The City Defense Army is only one of the departments that divide power. There is also the Execution Department responsible for execution and law enforcement, the army stationed in various districts of Ginza, the White Envoys in charge of their own districts, and the White Envoys from various forces, all of whom are qualified and capable of preventing the tribunal from executing the judgment. Therefore, after the tribunal issued the final judgment, the alchemists did not hesitate any longer. After quickly reaching a consensus, they began to exchange interests with the Execution Department and the White Envoys in the district where the workshop was located, trying to avoid the trial of the tribunal. At the same time, they also began to seek assistance from the army. Although the Rose War has ended, the Green Tide of Donner may defeat the coalition at any time and kill Sinner. Therefore, the army after the war has not been weakened, and of course, it has not continued to strengthen, and the army has always been one of the strongest forces in Ginza. After countless exchanges of interests, and after the alchemists paid a lot of interests with great pain, the Execution Department and the White Envoy were persuaded by them and began to take sides. As for the army, although they expressed some willingness at the beginning, after the army superiors received the news from the alchemist, the army suddenly cut off contact with the alchemist without any warning. And the alchemist also received some secret warnings. The expanding army has long become a thorn in the eyes of countless forces in Ginza. Almost everyone in Ginza does not want to see the army become stronger again. The alchemists' hasty operations have successfully made their image lose points among the top forces in Ginza. Although they will not come down to deal with the alchemists, their subordinates may not be. Although they may not be able to control the alchemists, they are still happy to do some free fueling. In this case, the plan of the Glorious Knights easily crossed a lot of obstacles and saved a lot of time. When the Execution Department and the White Envoy left, the Inquisition was indeed restricted. Although the tribunal was powerful, they could not really fight with other forces in Ginza. Moreover, due to the sudden incident, the tribunal had basically no extra forces in Ginza, and the people sent here were just squeezed out of the teams stationed in other urban areas. Compared with the execution squad and the white envoy who had the advantage in the local area, their numbers were not large, so they did not have much advantage. Therefore, the final judgment of the tribunal on the alchemist became a dead letter, almost impossible to implement, and even the blockade of the workshop area had loopholes, allowing some people to slip in and clean up and deal with various problems in the alchemy workshop. However, fortunately, the tribunal was well prepared and forcibly took away all the staff in the workshop. Therefore, even if there was a loophole in the blockade, the alchemy workshop could not be put into operation again. Afterwards, the tribunal, the city defense army, the execution squad, and the white envoy started a confrontation and negotiation on the judgment of the alchemist. In addition to facing the pressure from the city defense army, the execution squad, and the white messenger, the Inquisition had to deal with the support from various forces for the alchemist after the situation became clear. In this regard, the Inquisition did not resist stubbornly, but chose to compromise. As a veteran force in Ginza, they all knew that politics is the art of compromise. However, although both sides were willing to compromise, there were still differences in the specific implementation. Although the Inquisition was willing to make concessions, it still argued about every piece of evidence of the alchemist's guilt and completely disagreed with the conditions for the alchemist's acquittal, even if the alchemist was willing to secretly fund the Inquisition with a large sum of wealth. Anyway, even if the sentence was reduced, the alchemist would not be confiscated, and the alchemist would not be imprisoned or executed, and he would still be charged. In this regard, the execution squad and the white messenger thought it was acceptable, but the alchemist and the city defense army they supported firmly opposed it. In the end, the other forces withdrew from the debate, leaving the alchemists and the city defense army to continue arguing with the court. The two sides had a fierce argument over every clause in the final agreement, and they confronted each other. After arguing for more than 10 days, and the people of the court beating the city defense army more than a dozen times, the two sides finally took a step back and reluctantly reached a final agreement. In the end, the alchemists reluctantly accepted some of the charges and paid a large sum of compensation, and the court also took a step back, gave up most of the judgments, and lifted the blockade of the alchemy workshop. Among the countless clauses that were argued out, all the people detained by the court, except for a few alchemists, were abandoned by the alchemists. They were not willing to pay more compensation for these consumables, but directly put the blame on the Inquisition. Just as the alchemists were happily holding a grand banquet, the Inquisition also showed the signed treaty to all the prisoners, shattering their last hope for the alchemists. Finally, they were all released by the Inquisition after losing their jobs and feeling confused and helpless. As soon as they walked out of the Inquisition, the already prepared Radiant Knights immediately stopped them all. The administrative staff of the Radiant Knights took out a lot of new labor agreements. With good reputation, they successfully persuaded this group of people and incorporated them all into the newly established Chamber of Commerce. Afterwards, under the escort of the Radiant Knights, they avoided the streets and quietly went to the East District, which had been jointly controlled by the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition. As the alchemists celebrated their victory over the Radiant Knights again, some changes were quietly happening. Today I only have 2,000. 3 days of experiments and 1 day of exams have drained my brain. If zombies open my brain now, they will all leave disappointed. Chapter 154. After the tribunal was pulled from the field, the only force that faced off against the alchemists was the tribunal. When the old leader of the Glorious Knights led people to block the door, the efficiency and reliability of the information received by the alchemists was greatly reduced, and other forces on their side were either like the city defense army, which lacked strength and could not be seen. To the small actions of the Radiant Knights, they either sensed a problem but did not want to waste too much energy to find out the truth. Therefore, while the tribunal attracted all the attention, the Radiant Knights and Roland also quickly put various plans into practice. Except for the old leader and the people he led, basically all the personnel of the Radiant Knights in Ginza were transferred to the East District. The hands-on ability of extraordinary people is naturally not bad. Ordinary spellcasters may not be very good at physical strength, but for extraordinary knights, physical strength is their strong point. Even if he is just a knight squire, he can do more work alone than dozens of ordinary people, let alone first level, second level, third level, and even fourth level knights. Under their orderly cleaning, the countless piles of garbage in the East District were uniformly placed in several newly built large warehouses. After the garbage was disposed of, Roland also used a special spell to induce rain to flush all the East District. The East End, which was messy and full of every little filth, was cleaned up. Of course, the civilians in the East District would not just watch what the Radiant Knights did. Although the Radiant Knights are here to do good things, for the civilians living in the garbage dump, the Radiant Knights are just destroying their last home. Therefore, although many civilians chose to watch or run away, there were still some who resisted. In this regard, the Radiant Knights also discussed it first. If they could not be convinced, they would not be lenient and would directly knock him out and take him away. At the same time, the Radiant Knights will also continuously transport a large amount of supplies prepared in advance into the East District, providing basic living supplies and free purification treatments to gain the trust of civilians. At the same time, they also send administrative personnel to try to recruit among civilians. Worker. For civilians, the Radiant Knights are naturally kind and willing to give them the time and space they are used to. However, the Radiant Knights are not so kind to the evil elements who are parasitic within and bully the civilians. Whether they actively join or are passively involved, as long as they feel that something is wrong, there is only one result, and that is death. The one-size-fits-all approach of the glowing knights will definitely lead to unjust, false, and wrongful convictions. There will always be some people who are not guilty of death. However, the East District is too big, and the glowing knights are just a knighthood and do not have the energy to fine-tune criminals. The difference. Relying on killing the evil elements, providing daily necessities and free treatment to the civilians, with a big stick in one hand and candy in the other, the Radiant Knights naturally easily dealt with the entire East District. After all, the East District is a group of poor people. The huge East District only has a few extraordinary people with low standards. There are only a few first-level extraordinary people, so they can't stop the Radiant Knights at all. After controlling and cleaning up the entire East District, construction was naturally not left behind. In order to meet the housing needs of the huge population in the East District, the Radiant Knights transported a large amount of building materials, maintained and repaired all dilapidated buildings, and built 3- and 4-story high-rise buildings to eliminate the homeless. Families, one by one, were all crammed in. Since there were too many buildings to be built by the Radiant Knights, even though the Radiant Knights made preparations and brought in a large amount of building materials from outside, it was still not enough, so they had to purchase a large amount in Ginza, resulting in various low prices in Ginza. The prices of building materials have increased a lot. In addition to the housing problem, there is also the job problem. There are too many people in the East District, and there are too few jobs available to them, so that the civilians in the East District have no bargaining capital. In order to survive, they can only compete for these few job opportunities. The result is more and more jobs. On the contrary, the money is getting less and less. If the glowing knights cannot provide them with sufficient jobs, the East End will fall back into its previous state sooner or later. After all, the glowing knights cannot support them forever. In fact, this is one of the reasons why the Radiant Knights have been unable to solve the problems in the East District. Even if the Radiant Knights can build handicraft workshops to absorb the huge labor force, if all the excess labor is to be stuffed into the handicraft workshops, the labor costs will have to increase several times. If you want to make a profit from ordinary handmade products, it's too difficult. The market for handmade products in Ginza is not big. Even if you sell them at a reduced price, you won't be able to capture much of the market. Although they can be shipped out and sold elsewhere, the profit may not be as high as the shipping cost. Therefore, even if the labor force is sufficient, it is useless to have a high output in a manual workshop. Once a certain output is reached, further production will be a pure loss-making business. This means that the Radiant Knights will have to install a few more bloodletting slots. The Radiant Knights already have enough bleeding slots, and a few more will really drain them. However, the solution provided by Roland solved their troubles. Since ordinary handicraft workshops cannot support so many people, what about alchemy workshops? Roland knew that the most serious pollution in the East District came from the alchemy workshop, and when he was eyeing the alchemist's alchemy workshop, Roland was also thinking about how to replace their ecological niche in Ginza. If their ecological niche in Ginza is not destroyed or replaced, then even if the final judgment of the trial court is implemented, they will be able to make a comeback sooner or later. In the era before the birth of alchemy and the Academy of Strange Equipment, both alchemists and strange equipment masters were relatively rare professions. In the current world, even the lowest grade alchemical products are quite expensive. Alchemists can accumulate amazing wealth only by relying on alchemy workshops, which is enough for them to bribe various forces and hand over the huge compensation required by the tribunal. Moreover, alchemical products are very convenient to transport and have higher profits, which is enough to support the Radiant Knights to transport goods to other cities. Therefore, Roland provided some alchemical potion drawings to the Radiant Knights, such as healing potions, anti-poison potions, and purification potions. Although they are only some of the most basic alchemical potions, the market for basic potions is the largest. The profit is not as good as that of advanced potions, but basic potions require more manpower and can absorb more workers. At the same time, the manufacturing process is simpler and easier to understand. Even the Radiant Knights, knights who have never been exposed to alchemy, can learn it. At the same time, it also provides a way out for alchemists, opening up the market for basic potions and focusing on advanced customized potions. Chapter 155. In fact, the reason why the tribunal has been arguing with the alchemists is to delay the implementation of the East District Alchemy Workshop. When the alchemists re-recruited employees, sent out apprentices, and prepared to take some time to reopen their own alchemy workshops. In almost every district of Ginza, some shops have been replaced with new signboards, and some cheap handicrafts and alchemy potions that are lower than the market price have quietly appeared on the market. This is a new Chamber of Commerce registered by the Radiant Knights, the Tribunal, and Roland. The Radiant Knights are responsible for the daily operations of the Chamber of Commerce and the expansion and operation of the Alchemy Workshop. The Tribunal acts as a backer to protect the safety of the Alchemy Workshop and the Chamber of Commerce, and to eliminate the prying eyes of outside forces. Roland provided a large amount of initial capital and served as a technical expert to handle and solve technical problems encountered by the Alchemy Workshop. According to the agreement, the Chamber of Commerce's income will mainly be managed by the Radiant Knights and used for charity, while Roland and the Inquisition will be responsible for supervision and receive a fraction of the income. Originally, the old leader planned to let Roland take the lion's share. After all, it was Roland who provided the huge funds to build the Alchemy Workshop, and he also taught the most important alchemy process. However, Roland was not short of worldly wealth, so he rejected the old leader's suggestion and gave most of his income to the Radiant Knights for charity, while he would just get some change to meet his daily needs. As for the Tribunal, they also gave up the income from the Chamber of Commerce in exchange for the support of the Radiant Knights, and obtained complete law enforcement rights in the Eastern District. At the beginning, the products put on the shelves of the Chamber of Commerce store did not cause any waves. It wasn't until various knights, tribunals, and even some pantheon departments in Ginza suddenly changed suppliers of alchemical potions and placed huge orders from this new Chamber of Commerce that the various forces in Ginza realized the existence of these cheap products. Later, in each newly opened shop, spies from various forces came over and bought all the alchemy potions and took them back. Although they felt that since many knights and the tribunal had placed orders, these alchemical potions should most likely be good, but they still planned to buy one first and go back to test the effect. After the major forces came to visit, Ginza, which had been lively for several months, also became strangely quiet. Especially for the alchemists, their reorganized alchemy workshop work slowed down quietly. Night, New East District. In a dimly lit room, Roland was answering a boy's question at a table, while on the other side of the room, Hella was chatting in a low voice with the girl next to her. After answering the boy's question, Roland looked at the boy who seemed to be planning to ask something else. He glanced at the dark sky outside and spoke before he could continue asking. "It's late. I have to get off work. If you have any questions, please ask them tomorrow." Hearing Roland's words, the young man blinked and glanced at the dark night outside the window. He quickly packed his things. Then, he stood up and bowed to Roland to thank him. Roland naturally stood there without any psychological pressure and accepted his bow. Afterwards, he left the room with his sister who was chatting with Hella. Roland glanced at the amulet thrust into his sister's hand by Hella and said nothing. After the two left, Hella also walked to Roland's side. "A visitor is coming." Roland turned his head and looked in one direction and said lightly. Following the direction Roland was looking, Hella also looked over. Since Hella is now also a fourth ring spellcaster, her perception ability is already very strong. Therefore, under the premise of clear direction, she also discovered the approaching and malicious guy. A few low-level extraordinary beings in simple disguise. Hella frowned slightly and whispered. "Should we notify the Inquisition?" "No need, just a few alchemists." Roland shook his head slightly, walked out of the room, and continued. "Let's go over and listen to what they want to do." Hella nodded and followed Roland out of the room. After walking out of the room, she also used magic power to close all the windows and doors of the room. The two walked slowly down the stairs. When the two people walked out of the building and entered the street, several people with disguised identities happened to arrive. The leader looked at Roland for a few times, and then led the people over. After they approached, Roland stood still, looked at them calmly, and said, "How many alchemists? Your Excellency has good eyesight." After hearing Roland's words, they no longer concealed their identities and directly removed their disguises. The leader of the alchemists said softly. Then, they bowed politely to Roland. Although Roland didn't like these alchemists very much, he couldn't reach out to hit the smiling man, so Roland simply returned the gift. Then, Roland pretended not to know them and said calmly, "What do you guys want to see me for?" The leading alchemist smiled slightly and said, "We are here to invite you on behalf of the Alchemy Association. There will be a party tomorrow that all alchemists in Ginza will participate in. I wonder if you are interested." As he spoke, he took out an invitation from his pocket. Roland did not answer, but looked them up and down and said in a calm tone, "Invite me? Don't you know my current job? I think this invitation is not appropriate. Competition in business naturally depends on everyone's ability. This is just an academic discussion, not official business." He handed the invitation to Roland with both hands. "Not talking about business? It's all a private matter. If you can't beat me, you want to win me over, right?" "No, my apparent identity is that of a high-level spellcaster. What capital do you alchemists have to win over me?" Roland was speechless. Although he didn't know where they got their confidence, Roland had no intention of following their train of thought, so he waved his hand and said coldly, "I will accept your kindness, but I have something to do tomorrow, so forget it." "Your Excellency, aren't you curious about what the topic of tomorrow's discussion will be?" The alchemist in front of Roland showed a confident smile. He looked around, lowered his voice and said, "I don't know if you have heard of this person's existence." As he spoke, a strange breath flew out of him. After noticing this aura, Roland was a little surprised. The breath of the Lich King? Did they get the alchemy equipment from the Lich King era? It seemed that they thought I was a necromancer and wanted to use these things to win me over. However, I already have the crown of command, and I don't care about this thing. Although many thoughts flashed through his heart, Roland still said without changing his expression, "Please come back." Chapter 156. After all, the alchemist was quite wealthy. If he dared to win over Roland, the things he had must be good. Most likely, they were good things that would be attractive to high-level spellcasters. However, Roland was not an ordinary spellcaster. With Roland's knowledge, conventional things would not attract him. It would have to be a legendary piece of equipment to attract his attention. As for the spell knowledge left by the Lich King that they hinted at, Roland was even less interested. What he lacked the least was spell knowledge. Since Roland was completely unimpressed and coldly rejected it, the alchemist who came to invite him did not dare to force Roland to accept the invitation, and finally had to leave in disgrace. After the alchemist left in disgrace, Roland did not think much about it and took Hela back to their temporary residence in the New East District. The situation in the New East District has been established. With the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition, no matter how dissatisfied the alchemist is, he is helpless in the formal channels. The New East District is now the territory of the Glorious Knights and the Inquisition. If the alchemists dare to make trouble, they will die after trying. Even if the Inquisition did not do its best and suppress them at will, the alchemists could not bear it. They spent a huge amount of money to attract a bunch of forces to stand on their side, and the alchemists had to cut their flesh. They were so embarrassed when defending, and they still wanted to take the initiative to attack and cause trouble? In Roland's opinion, the alchemists were not fools, so they were unlikely to do so. They would probably have to grit their teeth and endure it. After all, Roland also left them a way out, didn't he? However, although he thought that the alchemists were unlikely to make trouble, Roland did not plan to stay in Ginza for a long time. After the cheap alchemy products were put on the shelves, Roland officially entered the sight of various forces in Ginza. Although Roland's deliberately created identity as a high-level spellcaster made them a little cautious, if Roland continued to stay in Ginza, all kinds of peeping and temptation would come sooner or later. After all, a high-level spellcaster without any power, as long as he stays in Ginza, no matter what he does, it is very likely to stir up the situation in Ginza, so the various forces naturally have to test Roland's purpose. With Roland's knowledge reserve, it is not difficult to disguise himself as a high-level necromancer with the blessing and the crown of domination, but Roland does not want to waste the power of the blessing and the crown of domination for disguise. Therefore, Roland plans to stay in Ginza for another month or two, and then leave Ginza. As for where to go next, Roland is a little hesitant. According to the original plan, Roland planned to stay in Ginza for a year or two, and then go to Donner to dig for treasure after Donner stabilized, but now Donner is still in a mess. In addition to Donner, Roland is not without other goals. He can go to the Kess Mountains to live in seclusion for another year or two, and dig some relics and find more extraordinary materials. Or he could continue to move westward, go to the Kingdom of Inter, and see the kobolds, or go south, return to the Tower of Truth, or visit the small human countries in the south. If that doesn't work, he can still take a boat to the Sun Elves. As mid-level spellcasters, Roland and Hela will not be discriminated against by the Sun Elves, so it shouldn't be a problem to get in. However, although he had many ideas, Roland didn't know why he had no interest in any of them, and didn't want to go to any of them. Therefore, after hesitating for a long time, Roland chose to escape, put this problem behind him, and planned to slowly think about it after leaving Ginza, and devote himself to the work of the alchemy workshop. When Roland spent more than a dozen peaceful days, the cheap alchemy potions produced continuously in the New East District finally began to work. After all forces completed the inspection of the alchemy potions, and the Pantheon and the Spellcaster Association stepped in to ensure the safety of the alchemy potions. These alchemical potions that were not recognized by the alchemist circle quickly defeated other alchemical potions on the market and devoured the alchemical potion market in Ginza at an alarming speed. Moreover, as the caravans traveled day and night, the alchemical potions quickly radiated to the surrounding cities with Ginza as the center. Since the formula provided by Roland was almost the most cost-effective formula of this era, and the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition were not prepared to make money from this, there was basically no cutting corners. Therefore, the alchemical potions in the New East District were not only 60% cheaper than the potions produced by the Alchemist Circle, but also 3 times more effective. The most important point is that the alchemical potions produced in the New East District have stable effects. They will not have different effects for each bottle of alchemical potion like the old alchemical potions. If you are unlucky, you may drink an alchemical potion that has no effect at all, or even a potion that is not only ineffective but also harmful to the body. In the past, it was monopolized by the Alchemist Circle, and there was no choice but to gamble. However, with the new alchemy potion coming, who would buy the old alchemy potion? It is known that alchemists often left Ginza in the past, but now, unless it is necessary, alchemists basically will not leave Ginza. Guess why? You know, because the old alchemy potion is unstable, many people have been cheated to death, and some extraordinary people who have been cheated are happy to kill them halfway. Compared with the old alchemy potion that is dragging down and the new alchemy potion that is cheaper, more effective, and more stable, even a fool knows how to choose. The reputation of the new alchemy potion spread quickly among adventurers before the Radiant Knights even had time to promote it. So much so that the alchemy potion was sold out in less than a day after it was transported to other cities. The Radiant Knights were also a little surprised about this, but they did not blindly expand their production capacity. Maybe it was just good luck that some adventure group used the potion? Therefore, the number of alchemy potions shipped from Ginza every day remained a stable number. However, the speed at which these potions were sold was getting faster and faster. There were even cases where the caravan had not arrived in the city, and an adventure group came over and took all the potions of the caravan with a wave of their hands. In the end, there were even adventure groups that sent people to Ginza to order a large number of alchemy potions. They did not let go of the alchemy potions on the market, and waived a lot of money to buy all the alchemy potions sold in almost all the shops in Ginza. Under this crazy desire, the price of some new alchemy potions that flowed into the black market even increased by more than 10 times. The Glorious Knights were really surprised by this madness. No, for so many years, the market for alchemy potions has only been as big as that developed by alchemists. How come the demand has suddenly increased so much? It's strange. Chapter 157. The Radiant Knights were puzzled. Originally, according to the production capacity determined by Roland, they were a little worried that they could not sell all the products. Thinking that the data of the first batch of goods could not be too bad, the knights discussed and squeezed out a sum of money to buy a large number of potions. In order to sell more goods, the Radiant Knights also looked for people everywhere to promote and shamelessly promote alchemical potions. Some went to other religious knights to promote, find acquaintances, and find connections. Some went outside Ginza and visited one monastery after another. Some knights of noble origin sent messages to their families and tried their best to get their families to support them. Even the old leader of the Radiant Knights shamelessly visited the Inquisition and the Pantheon to find connections. For the sake of the old leader, the Inquisition and the Pantheon ordered a batch as support. This is also the reason why some knights, the Inquisition and the Pantheon suddenly placed a large order after the alchemical potion was put on the shelves. Originally, I thought that these orders would be enough to support the alchemy workshop for a while. During this period, the Radiant Light Knights would work harder, do more publicity, and eat up part of the market occupied by the alchemist circle. Maybe the alchemy workshop would be able to maintain a balance between income and expenditure. This was already a very good ending for the Radiant Light Knights. They were even ready to tighten their pants and deduct some money to support the alchemy workshop if the alchemy workshop suffered losses. However, the result of the explosion now exceeded the imagination of the Radiant Light Knights. It was so fierce that the goods were stopped and bought as soon as they were shipped out of the alchemy workshop. How could I have such a dream? Since more than half of the output of the alchemy workshop had to give priority to the large orders set previously, the amount that could be shipped out for sale was relatively limited. Therefore, some buyers smelled the smell and ran directly to the door of the alchemy workshop in the New East District to squat and buy them immediately after the goods were shipped. Even if the Radiant Light Knights accepted Roland's suggestion and raised the price of alchemy potions, they could not stop their enthusiasm. After raising the price several times in a row, the forces squatting outside the alchemy workshop not only did not decrease, but even increased, so that the Radiant Knights had to increase the manpower of the alchemy workshop. No, where did so many buyers come from? I never saw you go crazy in Ginza before. Several white knights stood guard at the door of the alchemy workshop, looking at the adventurers and mercenaries fighting in the open space in front of them with some surprise. Alpaca, don't go too far. We only took 10% of the last batch, and this batch, you said we want 30%. Fuck you, how many people do you have, why do you need so many potions? Those useless things in your group, just die if they die, why do you drink potions? You adventurers, what are you fighting with us for? Do you want so many potions as tribute? They cursed and fought together. However, because the White Knights were watching here, they did not dare to cause death. They did not use any extraordinary power, but only relied on pure physical strength to beat. As adventurers and mercenaries, they were used to respecting strength, so after a fierce physical exchange, they also reached an unspoken rule that whoever won a fight would get more of the next batch of goods. The Radiant Knights imposed an additional restriction on them: a representative of a force could only come once a month. Therefore, every time the alchemy workshop was about to ship, there would be a fierce exchange of about 10 people at the door of the alchemy workshop. Of course, this was just because the Radiant Knights did not want to see too many people fighting at the door, so some big forces sent people to come several times, and the Radiant Knights also chose to turn a blind eye. After more than 10 minutes of fierce exchanges, they finally confirmed their respective shares after being beaten black and blue. Then, an administrative staff member of the Radiant Knights came to the door with a list. Before he could say anything, the people who had just finished fighting came over, and the adventurer who won the fight said with a smile, "General Manager Green, how much goods are there this time?" Green glanced at the list in his hand and said, "This time it's 3,000, how much do you want?" Hearing that this number was much higher than before, the adventurer was overjoyed. The places on his body that had been hit several times didn't feel so painful anymore. He quickly stretched out 3 fingers and said, 30%. Well, next one. While Green was talking, he also wrote it down on the list, and then he looked at the second person. How much do you want? 20%. After they divided up the goods, Green also took them into the alchemy workshop. After more than 10 minutes, they pushed boxes of alchemy potions and walked out of the alchemy workshop happily. They left the New East District, and then, escorted by countless companions waiting for good news, escorted the alchemy potions back to their base. This was the request of the Radiant Knights. In order to avoid affecting the normal life of the New East District, each force could only send one representative to the New East District, and no more. Looking at the new batch of representatives of forces outside the alchemy workshop, Roland was also a little emotional. Although Roland was prepared for the hot sales of alchemical potions. After all, in his previous life, players were once pissed off by the alchemists' alchemical potions. Do you know that a bottle of recovery potion that says it can restore 100 HP can only restore 50 HP at most after drinking it, and there may even be a negative buff? This amazing potion even forced players to give up unreliable potions and choose more stable and reliable herbs. Although the blood recovery is a bit worse, it is real after all. That's right, in the early days of the game in the previous life, players replenished blood not by drinking blood bottles, but by chewing grass or applying ointments, and even derived some players who made a living by picking herbs and rubbing ointments. It was not until the spellcasters walked out of the Tower of Truth, various extraordinary knowledge spread rapidly, a large number of alchemists were born, and more players became alchemists that blood bottles gradually replaced chewing grass. When the more reliable blood bottles first appeared, whether it was adventurers and mercenary NPCs or player guilds, they all waved money and bought them crazily. Although after that, when fighting humanoid monsters, they often drank blood bottles, but players would rather be tortured by humanoid monsters than go back to the previous life of chewing grass. Therefore, with the experience of his previous life, and the fact that Roland had spent several years in the Kess Mountains, he knew the huge demand for healing methods among adventurers and mercenaries. Therefore, Roland was not surprised. Adventurers and mercenaries did not buy old alchemy potions, but they would usually spend a lot of money to find some unknown but reliable alchemists or spellcasters to order some reliable recovery potions, or grit their teeth and spend a lot of money to exchange for some silver points to get some recovery potions from the Tower of Truth. Chapter 158. Just when Roland took some time to rest and finally had some time to relax, accompanied by a huge explosion, a ball of sparks bloomed in front of Roland's eyes. At the moment the sparks bloomed, Roland's figure instantly disappeared from the spot. At the same time, a ray of light also rushed from outside the New East District. At the center of the explosion, Roland passed through countless distances and instantly appeared in the sky. Then, without any hesitation, a space wave centered on him quickly swept downwards. In less than a second, the sparks and explosions that were still spreading below were forced to stop. Because the incident happened suddenly, Roland had no time to micromanage, so some ordinary people were also controlled by him. Roland glanced and did not find the guy who made the explosion. It was probably detonated remotely. He had a dark face and began to micromanage. First, Roland lifted the restrictions on ordinary people who had not been involved in the explosion. After lifting the restrictions, they continued their previous actions and looked at the place where the explosion occurred with curiosity or surprise. Some people who were close to the explosion, or even close to it, were stunned and sweating when they saw the sparks stagnating in front of them. "Leave now!" Roland's voice reached their ears from high in the sky. They were awakened by Roland and looked at Roland floating in the sky at the same time. Then, they rolled and crawled and ran away from this area. After they started running one by one, Roland also looked at the center of the explosion. Compared with those who were rescued by Roland immediately, the places affected by the explosion were not easy to save. In the center of the explosion, the people who were affected at the first time were basically blown to death, and even because some undead substances were mixed in the explosives, even their souls were all blown away. However, the people on the periphery were better. Their bodies were gone, but their souls were not damaged. Basically, those who were in the center of the explosion could not be saved. If their souls were still there, Roland could still think about helping to revive them. However, the people at the center of the explosion were not dead. Roland looked into the depths of the ruins. In the depths of the ruins, Anna was lowering her head, holding the amulet tightly in both hands. The amulet was glowing slightly, and it actively deployed a shield around it. Although there were countless cracks on it, it still withstood the first wave of impact, allowing them to hold on until Roland came. In addition to the amulet, Anna had several glowing objects all over her body. These were the gadgets Hela gave her. It was precisely because of this that the shield centered on Anna protected the room she was in and the 2 rooms next to it, saving more than 100 boys and girls. Seeing this situation, Roland nodded slightly. The amulets Hela gave her were all based on her subconscious. If Anna only saved her own life, the shield would only protect her alone, but, obviously, Anna was a kind girl, and the shield was almost expanded to the limit. If Roland came a few seconds later, they would all die here. Roland locked onto the more than 100 boys and girls, waved his hand, and used space teleportation to teleport them all out of the ruins and onto the open space outside. Then, Roland untied the restrictions on them. Everything in front of them changed dramatically. The boys and girls who suddenly moved from the classroom to an open space looked around in confusion. Roland didn't waste time to comfort them. The crown of domination on his right hand flickered slightly. Under his control, the crown of domination began to absorb the ordinary souls that were in a daze after their bodies were blown up. After Roland collected all the souls, the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition in the New East District also began to appear at the scene. They looked at Roland, who was collecting souls in mid-air, and then looked at the stagnant area in front of them and the crowd who ran out and sat outside. Although they didn't know what Roland was doing, they could guess that Roland was saving people. Therefore, they did not disturb Roland, but quickly moved. On the one hand, they sent people to seal off all the stagnant areas and prepare for the impact of the explosion. On the other hand, they quickly controlled all the people who escaped, maintained order, and collected relevant information. At the same time, the other personnel of the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition also began to seal off the entire New East District and restrict all population movement. Although they knew that it was unlikely that those who could cause trouble under their noses would be caught so easily, they still had to have the right attitude, and, what if? Maybe they could really catch someone? In addition, as a new urban area that is currently developing in full swing in Ginza, especially with the emergence of new alchemical potions, the New East District can be said to have attracted countless attention and attention. Even the Silver family and the Silver Emperor are quite concerned about this New East District. Therefore, in less than an hour, the extremely bad explosion in the New East District quickly spread throughout Ginza, and various related information was also placed in front of the bosses of various forces. As long as you are not a fool, you know that this matter has become a big deal. This naked provocation was enough to make the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition furious. Especially the Inquisition, they finally got the full law enforcement power in the New East District, but before they could even warm up to it, such a serious accident happened. How could they tolerate this? Although there are factional struggles within the tribunal, they will continue to face the problem of slapping the tribunal in the face and damaging the interests of the entire tribunal, no matter how serious the internal conflicts are. Moreover, in addition to the Radiant Knights and the tribunal, other forces are also quite dissatisfied with this. The price of the new alchemical potion has increased several times, but in order to respond to the support of other religious knights, monasteries, and pantheons, the large orders they placed before this were all at a price much lower than the previous lowest price. This explosion will definitely affect the alchemy workshop, so what about their orders? Moreover, they don't mind standing up and saying a few nice words after taking the advantage of the low price. The most fatal point is that the Silver family is also dissatisfied with this. The Radiant Knights have never evaded taxes. The taxes they received in the New East District are not a small amount, and they are still rising. What if this explosion makes the Radiant Knights angry and run away? The East District can be transformed from a garbage dump to its current appearance, but it is all their credit. If pushed to the limit, the Radiant Knights can simply move all the alchemy workshops to their own estates and lands. Then they won't have to pay a penny in taxes to the Silver Empire, and the New East District will once again become a garbage dump. Chapter 159. In short, under the influence of various interests, many forces in Ginza stood on the side of the Glorious Knights and the Tribunal. On the surface, they severely condemned the bad behavior of explosions and murders, and secretly, they also expressed their support to the Glorious Knights and the Tribunal. Except for the forces that support thorough investigation and liquidation, other forces basically choose to remain neutral and prepare to watch the show. With the support of so many forces, the Glorious Knights and the Tribunal will not turn Ginza upside down? Just when they thought that the furious Glorious Knights and the Tribunal would quickly send a large number of teams to track down the murderer, the Glorious Knights and the Tribunal did not do so. The New East District was reopened after being blocked for less than half a day, and the alchemy workshop was operating as usual. Except for a slight decrease in production, there was almost no change. As for the much anticipated Glorious Knights and the Tribunal, everything was normal except that they increased the number of personnel stationed in the New East District. Although I didn't see what everyone wanted to see, this weird silence still made people puzzled. The Radiant Knights and the Inquisition will do nothing? What a joke! Anyone who knows a little bit about history knows that they will definitely retaliate cruelly. So, although the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition did nothing, this unknown made people feel fearful and worried, and a subtle atmosphere spread all over Ginza. In this delicate situation, the city defense army and the execution squad that often provoked the Inquisition before subconsciously restrained themselves, and the adventurers and mercenary representatives who often fought in front of the alchemy workshop also became gentle and bought alchemy potions carefully. If the companions who received the alchemy potion all praised the alchemy potion, making the alchemy potion more and more attractive to them, they would not be so bold and dare to continue to buy the alchemy potion in such a delicate situation. In addition to the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition, the alchemist circle also received much attention. After the explosion, many people looked at them with suspicion. As they had conflicts with the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition some time ago, and the alchemists were also defeated in the alchemy potion market, they are likely to attack the New East District. However, everyone thinks that the alchemists should not be so stupid. The alchemist circle is just a small circle after all. The members inside are a group of alchemists with little combat power. Although they are relatively rich, they are just a small group that relies on the rules on the surface to live a comfortable life. Relying on the Order of Ginza, they can still fight against the Radiant Knights and even the Inquisition. However, if the alchemists use private means, they will really fail. Private means are quite simple and crude. Assassination, fighting, poisoning, and siege are all very common means. If they really play like this, with the alchemists' force, the Radiant Knights can kill all of them by sending a small team. It was because alchemists were usually honest and played by the rules of the game. They never used such dark means to fight other forces. Therefore, under the protection of the Ginza order, alchemists would not be assassinated. If the explosion was caused by alchemists, then the golden body that the alchemist circle spent countless years to condense would be completely useless. According to the unspoken rules of Ginza, as long as it is used, other forces can also use it on him. In this case, the alchemist circle should be destroyed. Moreover, the most fatal point is that even if it is played in a dark way, it is forbidden to make such a big noise. This means that the person who caused the explosion not only violated the rules of Ginza, but also violated the rules of Ginza's shadow. Alchemists should not be so stupid. So, although there are some doubts, most of them are just doubts, and they sent some people to try to collect intelligence. If it is really caused by alchemists, they don't mind selling the alchemists for a good price. In the alchemist circle, people were also panicking because of the bombing. In fact, people inside them seriously suspected that the bombing might be caused by some idiot. People outside might not know much about their small circle and think that there should be no such stupid guy, but as insiders, don't they know it? Idiots are really not rare in this circle. As an exclusive small circle, the condition for joining this circle is not to look at ability, but to look at background. As long as the background is strong enough, even an alchemist apprentice can get in. So, they have no doubt that there is really an idiot who caused the bombing in the New East District. In fact, on the day of the bombing, many alchemists who just heard the news fell into despair. The old leader of the Radiant Knights could rush in and kill everyone without any support, let alone now. Even if the old leader ran over immediately and killed everyone with one shot, they would not find it strange. Although the old leader did not do so, and neither the Radiant Knights nor the Inquisition sent anyone to the door. However, the strange and subtle atmosphere still put the alchemists under great pressure. In this high-pressure environment, coupled with the fact that they had lost countless money and the alchemy potion market was taken away, the various conflicts and differences within them quickly expanded and intensified. From the initial quarrel to the scolding, and finally even fighting. In order to maintain the unity of the small circle, they once again held a secret meeting. In the dark room, the leaders of various factions sat silently in their respective positions, and no one took the initiative to speak. In the increasingly heavy silence, the last faction leader pushed the door and walked in. "Why are you so late?" His arrival broke the silence of silence, and the leading alchemist looked at him and said. He did not pay any attention, but raised his head, looked over coldly, and said expressionlessly, "I'm here to tell you something today." Hearing his words, everyone in the room turned their eyes to him. He did not deliberately delay, and said coldly, "I want to quit the Alchemy Association." "Hey!" The leading alchemist was stunned, opened his mouth, and made a surprised sound. The other alchemists in the room also looked at him with different thoughts, some were surprised, some frowned, and some lowered their eyebrows calmly. Chapter 160. In the dark room, his words made the atmosphere in the room, which had just eased a little, heavy again. The leading alchemist looked at him, a little at a loss, and pursed his lips and said, "Sit down first, we can talk again." He ignored the alchemist's words, but calmly glanced at the other people in the room. "This is not a request, but a notice. As for you, take care of yourself." After leaving the last sentence, he turned around and left the room without hesitation. Bang! Hearing his words, the alchemist slammed the table and stood up, shouting loudly. "How dare you, what do you think this place is? Come and go as you please." He completely ignored the alchemist's words. As he left and closed the door, the alchemist who stood up and shouted angrily was suddenly embarrassed. The alchemist stood there, and after a moment of impotent rage, he could only sit back with a dissatisfied look on his face. After all, alchemists are just a small group bound together by interests. Apart from relying on grouping to exclude alchemists outside their small group, they themselves have little restraint. In the past, this kind of exclusion was still very effective. As long as you don't join them, then don't think about entering the alchemy potion market. However, as the new alchemy potions produced by the New East District quickly took away their alchemy market, let alone jointly excluding others, they will be squeezed out of the market by the New East District. In this case, who will care about the rules of this small circle? If you quit, you quit. The small circle itself is difficult to protect, so how can you punish them? After the rebuke of the leading alchemist was ignored, the performance of not even a harsh word also made the other alchemists in the room realize this. Several alchemists looked at each other for a few times, confirmed each other's thoughts, and finally made a decision. They stood up tacitly. "We also quit." After saying that, they also chose to leave directly. Before the leading alchemist could explode again, other alchemists in the room stood up one after another and chose to quit after someone took the lead. Within a few minutes, more than half of the alchemists chose to quit. Looking at the room that suddenly became somewhat empty, the remaining alchemists in the room looked at each other, somewhat surprised and at a loss, and the leading alchemist was even more gloomy. With so many people leaving, the meeting naturally could not continue, and in the end it ended with just a few hasty chats. Because the meeting did not get a good result, after several days of confusion, some alchemists who chose to stay were no longer so determined. Basically, every few days, scattered alchemists would quit and run away from time to time. Anyone with a discerning eye could see that this small circle was hopeless. Even if the explosion was not caused by them, after half of the alchemists ran away, they were not far from disbanding. You know, the alchemists who ran away are basically capable people in the small circle. Even if they leave the small circle, they can survive. Most of the alchemists who stayed are not very loyal to the small circle. They just stay because most of them got in through connections and have no skills. Running away will only make them worse. But, if all the people who work have run away, what's the point of those who eat for free staying? In other words, the more people who eat for free stay, the faster they die. In less than 10 days, the entire alchemy circle fell apart. For this reason, the alchemist who led the alchemy circle seemed to be hit by this situation. He hid in his house, closed the door and refused everyone's visit. After several days, the various forces in Ginza paid less and less attention to the alchemy circle. After all, the alchemy circle collapsed by itself, so there was no need to waste energy on such a waste force. Late one night when no one was paying attention, the house that had been closed for more than 10 days quietly opened its side door, and then 2 carriages quickly ran out of the side door. They avoided almost all the main roads, mainly walking on small roads and streets, carefully avoiding the crowd, focusing on secrecy and safety, and finally escaped from the inconspicuous side door of Ginza. After leaving Ginza, the 2 carriages were still moving at a normal speed on the main road at first, but after walking a distance, the speed of the 2 carriages quickly increased, running out of the main road, and plunging into the vast wilderness at the fastest speed. Without mercy on horsepower, the 2 carriages were completely away from Ginza in less than 2 hours. In a wilderness area that no one could find, the 2 carriages stopped where they were, the panting horses rested on the side, and some people sat around the campfire in silence. The alchemist sat in the carriage, holding a disc in his hand, silently scouting the surrounding environment. After confirming that no one was catching up, he also breathed a sigh of relief. As the nominal leader of the alchemist circle, he knew who did it within a few days after the explosion. As for why, it was because the mastermind behind the explosion was so scared that he ran to him to confess and ask for help. So, who is this idiot? His only child who inherited most of his alchemical knowledge. After learning the news, he wanted to strangle this idiot child on the spot. But, he is his own child after all, and it is useless even if he throws this stupid child to the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition. Even if it is really just his child who made the explosion, the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition will definitely take action against him, and he will probably have to pay a lot of money again. This is not okay. He has paid so much money before, and he has little money left in his pocket. Moreover, the alchemy potion market in Ginza has also been occupied by them. His main channel for making money has been cut off. If he pays again, he will really have no money. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, he gritted his teeth and came up with an idea. Rather than being cut by a blunt knife in Ginza, it is better to run away directly. According to the unspoken rules of Ginza, those who run away like this will generally not be pursued unless they have committed a particularly serious crime. Moreover, as the leader of the alchemy circle, he still has some ability. Even if he can't make it in Ginza, at worst he will go to other human principalities or kingdoms in the Silver Empire. Although it would certainly not be as comfortable as in Ginza, as a senior alchemist, he would still be treated as a guest of honor. Chapter 161. Just when he was thinking about which principality or kingdom to join. Above them, Roland floated in the air, looking down at everyone below silently. After all, the alchemist left quietly, so the people who could be brought out by the alchemist were basically the alchemist's direct relatives and confidants, belonging to a community of interests closely connected with him. Usually, when the alchemist ate meat, they could also share a sip of soup, so there was basically no possibility of betrayal. Roland closed his eyes, spread his mental power around, and calmly locked all the life forms below. Since they followed him out, they all died. After locking everyone, Roland opened his eyes, and then hundreds of dark light balls appeared around him and quickly covered and bombed below. When the light balls fell from the sky, some extraordinary people in the team also found something wrong. Urged by the crazy sense of danger in their hearts, they did not hesitate at all and decisively used their strongest defense methods. All of a sudden, they used up all kinds of equipment and props, such as enchanted equipment, alchemical potions, spell scrolls, etc. However, they reacted too late, and most of the equipment and props did not work, and the dark ball of light hit them directly. Bang! 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 Countless explosions broke out one after another. When the bombing was over, the team on the ground had suffered heavy losses. Except for a few seriously injured knights and a few spellcasters who reacted in time and were half crippled but not dead, all the others died in this attack. Roland did not hesitate, stretched out his index finger, and several weak black beams flew out from his finger, easily piercing their heads. After killing everyone around the campfire, Roland looked in the direction of the carriage. The wealthy alchemist naturally paid great attention to his own safety. The trigger-type defense means on his body ensured that even if he did not react, he could actively help him intercept the attack. However, his life was saved, but the carriage and horses were not so lucky. They were all destroyed in the attack. The alchemist's face was livid. He stood on the fragments of the carriage, looking at the people who were killed by the bonfire, and said to Roland with gritted teeth. "You broke the rules. I am responsible for my mistakes alone, why do you implicate them? Even if the bombing was done by us, don't you just want my property? I have given up all my properties in Ginza, why are you chasing me? Do you want to take away even the last bit of my things? I was stopped by you, okay, I admit it, but why did you kill them?" Roland looked at him expressionlessly without any answer. Seeing that Roland did not answer, the alchemist looked at the bodies that were blown into pieces by Roland, and tears flowed uncontrollably. His brothers, wife, and children all died in this wave of attacks. Why do you kill them? Even the Inquisition has no right to kill them. You murderer! He raised his head, looked at Roland, and accused loudly. Roland turned a page of the magic book as if nothing had happened, and said coldly. "So, is this your last words?" Hearing Roland's words, the alchemist's pupils shrank suddenly, and he looked at Roland in disbelief. He subconsciously took a step back, and the tears on his face stopped. He pointed at Roland with his right hand tremblingly, and said with a tone of fear that could not be concealed. "You want to kill me? You want to kill me? You want to kill me? How dare you? I am a noble. I am an alchemist. Even the old man Huangguang and the Inquisition have no right to kill me." In the fear of death, he howled hysterically. "Why do you want to kill me? Why?" Roland slowly fell from midair, a pitch-black spear condensed in his hand. As he condensed it, he slowly walked towards the alchemist. "No, no, 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 no." Under Roland's lock and the malicious and murderous intent of the high-level life form, the alchemist who had never sublimated did not even have the courage to turn around and run away. He could only sense the increasingly strong malicious and murderous intent while watching Roland approach. The sound of Roland's every step was constantly strengthening his inner fear. He kept wailing. "I can be your slave, Please, don't kill me, don't kill me. Why, what on earth did I do to offend you? As the alchemist kept begging for mercy, Roland calmly walked in front of him, then he held the black spear, and under the alchemist's collapsed and desperate gaze, the black spear pierced his heart. When the black spear pierced through his body, the dark element attached by Roland with strong corrosiveness spread wildly in his body. At the same time, the soul in his body was also forcibly absorbed by the spear, polluted, crushed, and devoured inch by inch. The double torture of the body and soul made the alchemist's eyes widen. Ah! The extremely tragic scream instantly resounded throughout the world. Just when the alchemist was about to die of pain, the black spear piercing his body would emit a little positive energy and life force, cutting off the possibility of him being killed by pain alive. He could only watch his body being corroded and annihilated by the dark elements, and his soul being completely polluted, crushed, and swallowed up. Looking at the alchemist with a hideous face due to pain, Roland felt nothing in his heart. He was just imitating the explosion in the New East District. The souls of those who were killed in the explosion were also tortured in this way, but the souls of ordinary people were more fragile and died in a few seconds. Thinking of this, Roland turned his head and looked at the corpse next to him. With a wave of his hand, he extracted all the souls in the corpse. Then, Roland selected them. Those who had nothing to do with the explosion case were killed by Roland. For those who had something to do with the explosion case, Roland threw them directly into the alchemist's body and roughly sewed their souls together, so that they could hold on for a while longer and suffer a little more. The alchemist's mourning lasted throughout the second half of the night. When the first ray of sunlight shot out from the horizon and stopped at Roland's silent profile, the alchemist stopped mourning. His body, which was completely eroded by the dark elements, slowly fell to the ground and shattered into countless black debris. Roland silently looked at the pile of black debris in front of him and the black spear floating above. With a wave of his hand, the black spear turned into scattered dark elements, which slowly merged into the surrounding environment under the illumination of a few rays of sunlight. Chapter 162. After the explosion, the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition did not make any big moves. One of the main reasons was Roland's strong request. For the ruling class of Ginza, the explosion in the New East District was not a big deal, nor was it a small deal. Even with the support of other forces, the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition could only kill a few small fish and shrimps from the alchemist circle, and at most they could only execute the main culprit who planned the explosion. As for the others, at most they would just have to pay some more money. After all, the value of the people in the New East District was not as good as that of the alchemists. Unless the alchemists directly slaughtered the entire city, they basically did not have to pay with their lives. This was the traditional common sense of this world. Whether it was the Radiant Knights or the residents of the New East District, they all thought so and never felt that it was wrong. Roland did not like this so-called tradition. Although he did not like it, he did not intend to challenge this tradition. Therefore, Roland did not think about or investigate the countless casualties caused by the alchemists' alchemy workshops in the past. However, Roland clearly didn't want to delve into these things, but the alchemist still wanted to create an explosion in front of him. Roland was a little unhappy, so he didn't intend to obey the so-called tradition, but to deal with this matter according to his own ideas. What bullshit rules and traditions, I'll kill them all. After confirming the idea of killing the alchemists' families, Roland naturally took action with this goal. He persuaded the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition and got a list of alchemists from them. Afterwards, Roland instigated the alchemists and guided the behavior of the alchemist circle, while disguising and hiding his identity. With the assistance of the instigators within the alchemists, Roland took advantage of their meeting to mark everyone. Under Roland's guidance, and with the cooperation of the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition, the alchemists who were worried about being targeted by the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition withdrew from the circle one after another and ran away. And once they left Ginza, Roland would immediately chase them. For these people, Roland would first beat them, and then use the soul blessing of the Crown of Domination to read their memories. If they knew nothing and were innocent workers, Roland would let them go, but, except for the explosion case, as long as they knew that it was the alchemy workshop that discharged the sewage, they would die. Although Roland was not a murderer who liked to kill people, the result was that, except for a few alchemists who had just joined Ginza and ran from their hometown, they really knew nothing and were let go by Roland. The remaining alchemists, including all the people in the same group, were all killed by Roland. It can only be said that those who could run away at this time were basically few and clean, and Roland could only let them all die. After killing the nominal leader of the alchemy circle, Roland also set his sights on the remaining alchemists who were hiding in Ginza. Although most of these alchemists were incompetent, they were at a loss in the face of the Radiant Knights and the Inquisition, and they were cowardly wastes. However, they are not innocent. They are cowardly and useless when facing those who are stronger than them, but they are very good at bullying ordinary people. By taking out the alchemist's memory, Roland crossed out a dozen names based on the remaining alchemist list and made a new list. It is not to kill the dozen alchemists who were crossed out, but to kill all the remaining alchemists except these dozen alchemists. However, if Roland wants to kill all the alchemists on the list in Ginza, he has to make some preparations in advance. The lives of ordinary people are worthless in Ginza, and they will die if they die, but if you kill too many alchemists who have a little status in one go, it will still cause some waves and trouble. Although Roland killed many alchemists, because the place where Roland acted was remote and he would destroy the bodies, the alchemists in Ginza did not notice any problems and continued to live in fear. Therefore, Roland seized this opportunity and quietly cursed every alchemist, their family members, and confidants. Late one night, when Roland was about to go out quietly to continue to curse people, he stopped by the window. He turned his head to look at the door, closed the window as if nothing had happened, turned around and found a chair nearby to sit down, then took out the magic book from the space bracelet and slowly flipped through it. Another person in the room, Hela, looked up at him, and seeing that he had no instructions, she lowered her head to continue studying. After a while, there was a knock on the door. "Come in." Roland closed the magic book and said to the door. After receiving the reply, a white knight pushed the door and walked in. He first saluted Roland slightly and said respectfully, "Sir, the leader invites you." "Yes." Roland nodded, put the magic book into the space bracelet, stood up, and followed the white knight out of the room. Hela glanced at the gesture Roland made to him from behind, blinked, and obediently followed Roland's words without following. After following the white knight out of the New East District, Roland came to the old headquarters of the Radiant Knights. This is a purely military area that is dozens of times more gorgeous than the current headquarters of the Radiant Knights. Compared to the new headquarters, which had almost no defense, the old headquarters was particularly heavily guarded. Basically, there would be knights standing guard at every distance. In addition to the knights on guard, Roland could encounter a patrol team armed to the teeth every few minutes on average. In addition, the surrounding buildings and the ground were engraved with various complex spell runes, mainly for warning, defense, and various functional purposes. Under such strict vigilance, it was naturally very difficult to sneak in. Although Roland could not be stopped, if Hela came, she would probably be stopped at the outermost perimeter. Even the White Knight who led Roland had to undergo strict inspection. Originally, Roland was also to be inspected, but the White Knight took out the certificate provided by the old leader and exempted Roland from the inspection. Originally, Roland was going to turn around and leave directly, but since there was no need for inspection, Roland was ready to meet the old leader. What did he want Roland to come here for? After dozens of complex inspections and waiting, Roland followed the White Knight and finally arrived at their destination. A large building with golden splendor. Standing in front of the building, Roland raised his head and looked at the hidden and powerful legendary magic circle above the building, feeling a little surprised. Chapter 163. If Roland guessed correctly, this is probably the treasure house of the Radiant Knights. Searched can on Google. The legendary magic circle on top of the treasure house is most likely the work of Littorio. Although a long time has passed, the legendary magic circle in front of you is still protecting the treasure house in front of you. Of course, the long time has left its mark on it, but after all, the Silver Empire is a country founded on spellcasters, and it is full of talents. Even if you can't create a legendary magic circle by yourself, you can still make simple repairs. Even from Roland's perspective, this legendary array, which has been repaired countless times, is already very good. Basically, there are no major problems, only some minor holes that are difficult to fix. If Roland was a high-level spellcaster now, he should be able to sneak in quietly through these loopholes. While Roland was idle and bored, thinking about how to avoid the legendary magic circle and get in, the old group leader who received the news also walked out of the building. "Come with me, there's something I want you to see," the old leader said in a low voice. Roland looked at the retreating White Knight, nodded slightly, and accepted his invitation. It's just a legendary magic circle that operates autonomously, and it doesn't scare Roland. After his last encounter with the Lich King, Roland spent more than 10 days preparing an 8th level space spell in his and Hela's bodies. Although it is a bit troublesome to spend half an hour every day to ensure the stability of the spell model, but if one day you encounter a spellcaster like the Lich King who restrains himself, there is no need to waste time with him, pull it and you can run away directly. If Littorio was still alive, Roland would really not dare to enter the treasure house in front of him, but now he is full of confidence. Roland followed the old leader slowly down the corridor. There was no one else in the long corridor, only Roland and the old group leader. After walking for an unknown amount of time, the old leader stopped in front of a door made of mithril. He skillfully opened the seal on the door and said nonchalantly, "Speaking of which, Mr. Roland is very good at necromancy." Standing behind the old group leader, Roland looked at his overactive positive energy and said lightly, "I know a little bit, but I'm pretty proficient." "Yet?" The old leader responded casually, as if he was just asking a casual question, and calmly opened the door. "Let's go," he said and walked into the room. Roland also walked in. There are not many things stored in the room. On the vast site, there are only a dozen pillars made of mithril and engraved with countless runes. There were some scattered things placed on each pillar, but Roland could not see clearly what was on it, and could only vaguely make out the general outline. There is a covering magic circle on each pillar. Although it is not very strong, Roland has no enmity with the Radiant Knights, and Roland is still polite and well behaved on weekdays. Since it was hidden from view, Roland naturally wouldn't peep. Roland followed the old leader step by step to the deepest part of the hall, and stopped in front of a remote pillar. Looking at the pillar in front of him, Roland glanced at the crown of dominance on his finger. It was resonating with the things on the pillar. Although Roland controlled it, its instinct was still restless and it eagerly devoured the things on the pillar. Fortunately, the crown of dominance in Roland's hand has been completely controlled by Roland, and its instinctive restlessness was easily suppressed by Roland. Another fragment of the crown of dominance. This is not surprising, after all, the undead disaster caused by the Lich King was smashed to pieces by the Silver Empire. It is normal for the Silver Empire to have fragments of the crown of dominance. It is probably still a big piece of debris that can be placed in such a defensive treasure house. But what is the point of bringing me here? Roland raised his eyebrows slightly. The old leader untied the shielding circle on the pillar, revealing the fragments of the crown of command. Looking at the fragments in front of him, the old leader spoke. "Do you know what this is?" "A fragment of the crown of dominance." Roland didn't pretend and said casually. He did not intend to pretend that he did not recognize the crown of dominance. The old group leader looked at him with some surprise. Roland met his gaze and calmly raised his right hand, the crown of command on his finger flashing slightly. "I have a part of it. Trust me so much." Looking at the crown of command flashing in Roland's hand, the old leader smiled and said, "There's nothing to hide, and I've never hidden anything, so why don't you come to see me?" Roland put down his hand and said casually, "If you want me to hand over the crown of command, don't think about it. I refuse. Sometimes I'm really curious, are you really a high-level spellcaster?" "I'm curious, what level are you at now?" The old captain looked at Roland with some emotion in his tone. "4th level." Roland turned the crown of command in his hand and said casually, "You? 4th level?" The old captain looked at Roland and finally couldn't hold himself any longer. His eyes were full of surprise, and he looked Roland up and down. "It's the truth." Hearing Roland's answer, the old leader hesitated. He looked at the crown of domination in Roland's hand, and thought about the information about Roland, and his mind was a little confused. This is not the same as what was agreed. After thinking quickly, the old leader threw all the previous plans in his head out of his mind and asked directly. "The crown of domination in the Court of Silence is also in your hand, right? That underground battlefield is the remnant of your victory over the Lich King, right?" "Indeed." Roland nodded without refutation. He couldn't hide the battle with the Lich King when he was in the Tower of Truth. Although he and the Lich King reached a strange tacit understanding at that time, Roland and the Lich King did not want to make too much noise, and they both chose single-target spells to minimize the damage to the surrounding terrain as much as possible. Although single-target spells cannot directly change the terrain like large-scale spells, the traces left behind are not so easy to dissipate. Therefore, it is not surprising that they were discovered by the schools that cleared the secret society. As for why the Radiant Knights knew this, after all, this is Ginza, the political center of the Silver Empire, and the old leader has a wide network of contacts, so it is not difficult to find out this. The old leader took the fragment of the crown of domination from the pillar and handed it to Roland, saying, Do you have the ability to control another piece? Roland looked down at the crown of domination he handed over, raised his eyebrows slightly, and said. I have the ability, but give it to me? Are you sure? Chapter 164. Looking at the fragment of the crown of domination handed over by the old leader, Roland suspected that he had bad intentions and was trying to fish. The old leader nodded and said. As long as you dare to take it, I will give it to you. Anyway, this thing has been here for who knows how many years, and there is no use keeping it. Rather than leaving it here to gather dust, it is better to give it to you. Roland took the fragment from his hand and controlled the crown of domination on his finger to swallow the fragment in one gulp. With this large fragment, Roland has collected 4/5 of the fragments of the crown of domination. Are you ready? The old leader suddenly said something inexplicable. Roland stopped playing with the crown of domination, looked up at him slightly, and said nonchalantly. Are you talking about the alchemy workshop? It's almost ready. The old leader sighed and reminded. Some things cannot be done if you are too anxious. Roland smiled and said. After all, I'm not from Siner, so I won't stay here for long. Have you decided? I've decided. The old leader shook his head and said helplessly. Well, since you've made up your mind, I won't persuade you anymore. People like you can't be restrained by Ginza. It's a pity. If you were a knight, someone would have taken over my class. Didn't you recruit a new batch of apprentices recently? The Radiant Knights are full of talents, and there will always be the right people. Roland followed his words and began to persuade him. The old leader smiled when he heard his words and continued. You don't need to say hello to us when you leave. Just go ahead and don't look back. We will be watching you in the East District. If you are caught up, you should know what to do. Roland nodded. I won't see you off. You should have something else to do. Goodbye. The old leader took out a rag and said without looking back as he approached the pillar. Looking at his back, Roland was silent for a while, bowed, and turned to leave the treasure house. Although the old captain himself was only a mid-level knight who had been stuck at level 6 for many years and had basically lost the possibility of promotion, it was impossible for him to detect Roland's small movements by himself. However, he was in charge of a large knight group after all, and had strong connections, so it was not impossible for him to detect Roland's small movements. The conversation between Roland and the old captain just now seemed to be just a casual chat. But in fact, the old captain was hinting that Roland didn't need to be so anxious to kill all the alchemists. There was still a long time, and there would be ways to deal with them in the future. There was no need to risk being hunted down. The water here in Ginza was very deep, and even a high-level spellcaster might not be able to figure it out, let alone you, a 4th-level spellcaster. Roland's answer was that he didn't have the patience and didn't want to wait. As for the danger, it didn't matter, I would run away. After getting Roland's answer, the old captain also gave up the advice, but finally reminded Roland to be careful when killing, and run away quickly after killing, so as not to be caught. He would help cover it up, muddy the water, and help Roland buy time. After leaving the treasury, Roland continued his plan and prepared a surprise for each of the remaining alchemists on the list. Although the old leader could not help Roland, he could still find an excuse to mobilize the Knights' arrangement in the new East District to facilitate Roland's entry and exit. Therefore, after spending a few more days, Roland prepared surprises for all the alchemists on the list. One afternoon, after Roland and Hela each made a simple disguise, they walked out of the room and walked around the entire new East District. Although not many people in the new East District knew Roland, most people in the new East District only knew of his existence from the mouth of the Radiant Knights. However, as a technical consultant for the alchemy workshop, there were not a few people who knew Roland. In order not to disturb the normal lives of the residents of the new East District, Roland also made a simple disguise. Speaking of which, the planning of the new East District was still designed by Roland, but although he designed it, Roland himself has not seen the real thing since the completion of the construction. The huge profits from the alchemy workshop allowed the Radiant Knights to continue to invest a large amount of money in the new East District to improve people's livelihood. Although the residents of the new East District still do not look as strong as those in other districts and are generally thin, their demeanor is obviously much better than that of the previous East District. They are no longer lifeless and numb, but have good expectations for the future. After a tour of the new East District, Roland also took Hela to the headquarters of the Radiant Knights. Although the old leader said that there was no need to say hello, Roland still planned to say goodbye to them. Not here. Hearing the words of the White Knight in front of him, Roland was a little surprised. Yes, the leader went to the trial court early this morning and has not returned yet. The White Knight on guard explained. Since he is not here, forget it. Is there something urgent? I can send someone to notify the leader. The White Knight straightened up and said seriously. Is someone trying to cause trouble again? No, it's nothing. It's just a personal matter. Since the old leader is not here, I'll go back. Roland shook his head, thanked him politely for his answer, and turned to leave. You're welcome. The White Knight also saluted in return with a serious face. When Roland walked to the entrance of the parish, he saw a knight squire running over from outside. Arthas? Why is he here? Roland was a little surprised to see the knight squire running over. When he saw Roland, Arthas also stopped immediately, and saluted Roland with a somewhat unfamiliar knight, saying, Teacher. Roland nodded slightly, and he looked Arthas up and down for a few times, thinking of the news that the Radiant Knights were recruiting new members some time ago, and asked. Have you passed the new recruit review? Arthas nodded with an embarrassed look on his face. Not an alchemist anymore. No, learning alchemy can't protect my family. I'm sorry, teacher, I failed your cultivation. Arthas lowered his head and said. It doesn't matter. I can't teach you for long. Joining the Radiant Knights is indeed a good choice for you. Roland said in a gentle tone. He had originally planned to go to Arthas's house and give him some alchemy books for self-study, but since he had given up alchemy, forget it. Since you have joined, you should work hard. Are you still training? Go ahead. Roland patted his shoulder and patted a blessing into his body. After hearing Roland's reminder, Arthas also reacted, bowed to Roland, and said. Teacher, then I will leave first. After saying that, he ran in a panic, holding the things in his arms. Chapter 165. After watching Arthas disappear from his sight, Roland looked at Hela and said. Let's go, it's time to leave. Hela nodded and followed Roland without any regrets. In the last sunset, Roland and Hela left Ginza. In the Ginza tribunal, the old leader who received the news also walked out of the room. He held the railing and looked silently in the direction of Roland. He had a hunch that the meeting in the treasure house might be the last time he and Roland saw each other. He slowly closed his eyes. A spellcaster who is proficient in the dead, has a bright heart, can confront and win the remnant soul of the Lich King at the 4th level, seems to have countless trump cards, and is fearless in the face of anyone. What kind of storm will he stir up in this world? The old leader sighed deeply. Recalling the geniuses he had seen in Ginza over the years. He had a hunch that when they all grew up, a new storm might be coming, but he should not be able to see it. The old leader stood in front of the balcony, waiting silently. Not long after the sunset faded and the sky darkened, a white knight rushed in and shouted loudly. Leader, it's bad, all the alchemists are dead. The old leader turned his head, frowned, and said calmly. Are there any survivors? No, they were all killed in one blow, and their souls were annihilated. The White Knight answered seriously. Well, treat it as suicide out of fear of crime. The old leader nodded and said casually. It seems that Roland's methods are much more sophisticated than he imagined. Hearing the old leader's words, the White Knight was a little surprised. Although he didn't know what was going on, he didn't ask much. After nodding, he turned around and left directly. As he left the room to solve these troubles, he was also muttering in his heart. Why did the old leader start killing again? He was not surprised by the old leader's answer. After all, decades ago, the old leader dared to bear the pressure of most forces in Ginza and hit the alchemist hard in public. Even if he was relatively mild compared to Roland, he was particularly radical compared to other people in Ginza. Although he killed a lot of people this time, with the support of the tribunal, the old leader should not have any problems. Just as the White Knight was thinking about how to help muddy the water and cover for the old leader, he didn't know that the old leader was also using himself as bait to muddy the water. At the same time, in the distance of Ginza, Roland stood on a small hill, and the bright black spots on his right hand lost their light one by one. After confirming that everyone on the list he had drawn up was dead, Roland turned and left. Hela followed Roland and asked. Where are we going next? We can't stay in the Silver Empire. Roland took out a map from his space bracelet and said as he looked at it. Roland didn't think he could keep the truth from the powerful spellcasters in Ginza forever. Even with the help of the old leader, the truth would be revealed sooner or later. So, he couldn't stay in the Silver Empire any longer. Then, the Kess Mountains were not an option. In fact, the reserves of extraordinary materials in the space bracelet were still sufficient, so there was no need to risk going to the Kess Mountains. The Tower of Truth was not an option either. Although the Tower of Truth was relatively independent in the Silver Empire, it was still part of the Silver Empire after all. Maybe the Silver family would send someone to catch him? Go back to the north? Although the turmoil in the Kingdom of the North has not completely erupted, there are many struggles in secret. Even in Sinner, Roland can receive news of the bizarre deaths of some extraordinary people in the north. If he goes back, wouldn't he be walking into the storm? Moreover, there is no soil for spellcasters to grow in the north. Or the Moon Elves. No, the Moon Elves are too peaceful and not suitable for Hela to grow. If he went west, the discrimination in the Kingdom of Inter was serious. Roland, a northerner, would not be welcomed there. The dog-headed people further west were still in a state of division. He might be involved in it. If he chose to go south, those scattered human countries were not worth visiting, and it was not a good choice to travel far to the Sun Elves. Roland did not like the Sun Elves in the game in his previous life, and he would only hate them more in this life. After thinking about it, Roland looked at Donner, which was still in turmoil. All the countries in Donner had basically collapsed. The ones who were still active were basically local resistance forces composed of local refugees and exiled warriors. The extremely chaotic environment was very suitable for Roland to avoid the limelight. Even if the Silver Empire wanted to do something, it could not do anything in the environment of East Roland. Moreover, the destruction of a large number of kingdoms meant that countless knowledge and wealth were left on the land of Donner, waiting for Roland to open and collect. In addition, as the first line against the Green Tide, fighting and killing are indispensable. Roland ignored a lot of things and successfully convinced himself. After having a goal, Roland looked at Hela and said, "I'm going to Donner, what about you?" Hearing Roland's words, Hela blinked and said with some surprise, "Didn't you say before that you would wait for Enwen?" As she spoke, Hela stopped and met Roland's eyes. After looking at each other in silence for a while, Hela smiled slightly and said, "Didn't we agree? We want to become legends together. Do you want to go to Dungnar to eat alone? If you want to go to Dungnar, you have to take me with you." She stretched out her hand, took the initiative to hold Roland's right hand, and whispered, "Although I can't catch up with you yet, I will try my best. Please don't abandon me." Roland pursed his lips and said calmly, "Have you decided? You have other choices. The Soul School will be happy to accept you." "I've decided, I'm going." Hela held Roland's right hand with both hands, put it on her chest, and said seriously, "Okay, let's go." Roland took his right hand out of Hela's hands, said something calmly, and turned towards the road. Hela looked at her hands and clenched her fists subconsciously a few times. Then, she looked up at Roland. Roland's pace was obviously much faster, so much so that when Hela was in a daze, Roland and Hela were far apart. Seeing this, Hela quickly ran after him. "Going so fast? The Ginza side will find out soon. We have to leave quickly." "Oh, I know." As the last voice with a hint of laughter dissipated in the wind, Roland and Hela stood side by side and soon disappeared into the wilderness of the night. Chapter 166. After confirming that they were heading to Donner, Roland and Hela made various preparations silently as they headed east. Since the current situation in Donner was not stable, for safety reasons and some vague thoughts in his heart, Roland purchased a large amount of basic food and supplies in Zener, and stuffed them all into his and Hela's space bracelets. The current situation in Donner is not stable, although it is nominally a war between the coalition forces and the Green Tide. But, in fact, whether it is the United Army or the Green Tide, the internal situation is quite chaotic. On the Union Army side, although the legendary Eleanor is nominally the supreme leader of the Union Army, the internal composition of the Union Army is too complicated. There are the exiled soldiers and knights who fled together after the demise of other kingdoms, the militia formed by the local towns to fight against the Green Tide, the local bandits recruited from all walks of life, and the adventurers and mercenaries who came from Donner and the Northland. Soldiers. And although humans occupy the mainstream of the United Army, the proportion of other alien races is also not small, including dwarves, halflings, dwarfs, and even half-orcs. There are still differences within the foreign races. Take the dwarves as an example. There are dwarf clans that were driven out from the Dragon's Back Mountains and local dwarves living in Donner. There are still quite a few conflicts between them. In addition to countless complex contradictions, in order to fight against the Green Tide, the Union Army is constantly absorbing all forces, which also makes the composition of the Union Army more and more complex. Moreover, the most fatal point is that Eleanor, the leader of the Union Army, has never had the time and energy to solve these problems. This resulted in the coalition being only a nominal alliance, divided into dozens of different forces and factions. They divided their territories and barely maintained mutual help under the death pressure of the Green Tide. As for the Green Tide, under Ganeazu's deliberate indulgence and cultivation, the Green Tide was divided into warlord territories. Except for the outermost green-skinned warlords who would actively attack the United Army in order to expand their territory, the internal green-skinned warlords basically focus on civil war, attacking and annexing each other. Unless Ganeazu personally orders it, none of these internal green-skinned warlords will be sent to the front lines of the Green Tide and the United Army. It is precisely because of this that the Union Army can fight the Green Tide in a back-and-forth manner. If all the green-skinned warlords had come forward, the Union Army would have been dead long ago and there would be no need to struggle. In the hotel room, Roland placed a map of Donner on the table. On the side of the table were various pieces of information piled up. This is the latest revised power distribution map of the Adventurers Association. The Adventurers Association has roughly drawn the areas controlled by the Union Army on it. Roland took out a pen and roughly drew the distribution of various forces within the Union Army on a map based on various recruitment information obtained from the Adventurers Association. Hela sat aside, flipping through and sorting out the information from the Adventurers Association, and quietly reminding Roland to correct some deviations on the map. After drawing all the large and small forces, Roland also put down his pen and stared at the map silently, thinking about which force would be better to go to. After thinking for a while, Roland still hesitated. Although he had decided to go to Dungnar before, he had not yet made up his mind. If he wanted to help the Union Army defeat the Green Tide and save Donner from the future tragedy, Roland should go to Eleanor's location, which is the core area of the Union Army. However, if Roland wants to take advantage of the chaos in Donner to seize power and shape a new country with his own will, then Roland cannot go to the core area, but should go to the edge area where the Union Army's power is weakest. Looking at Roland, who was hesitant, Hela tugged at the corner of his clothes. Looking at Hela's concerned eyes, Roland pursed his lips and asked, "Hela, if there is something you want to do but it is difficult and almost impossible to achieve, will you do it?" Hela was a little surprised when she heard Roland's words. This was the first time she saw Roland showing hesitation and lack of confidence. She thought thoughtfully for a while, and then spoke. "You told me before, if you don't try, you will never succeed. Even if you try and fail, it's better than doing nothing." After hearing Hela's words, Roland looked at the map and said with some emotion, "Yet, if you don't try it, how will you know it doesn't work?" After Roland had already made a decision in his heart. Go to the edge of Donner, and then form a team to fight against the Green Tide and compete for the leadership of the edge. Roland didn't want to think about things that were too far away. He set a small goal first, formed a new force, killed Ganeazu, pacified Donner, built a brand new country from scratch, and shaped it into what he wanted. Roland looked up at Hela and said in a serious tone, "Next, I will join the struggle in Donner. Either I will win and take over the entire Donner, or I will fail and die in the wilderness. Are you sure you want to follow me?" Hela smiled at Roland, who had made a decision, and said, "No matter what you decide, I will follow you." Roland nodded, then placed his finger on the northwest area of Donner and said, "Then, let's start from here." After clarifying their direction and goal, Roland and Hela also sped up. While the two of them were on their way, they also began to plan in advance. Although Roland was here to seize power, he did not intend to ignore the United Army and sneak in directly. Instead, he was prepared to accept the invitation of the internal forces of the United Army and sneak in according to the rules. After all, Roland and Hela both had proof of being 4th-level spellcasters. As rare talents, the treatment given by the United Army would naturally not be bad. After sending a message through the Adventurers Association, expressing his willingness to join the team against the Green Tide and proposing conditions, the forces occupying that area responded to Roland in less than 3 days, almost completely agreeing to Roland's request, and even taking the initiative to relax the restrictions. Roland did not hide his ambitions at all. His requirements were also very simple. Roland did not want wages or soldiers. He just wanted to be allowed to recruit soldiers and give him a recruitment quota of 3,000 people. If he could not afford the soldiers' wages, Roland could also pay for it himself. As for Roland's request, the other side also agreed to most of it. Not only did they allow Roland to recruit soldiers, they were also willing to grant him the title of nobility in advance and give him several towns to govern. As for the soldiers' salaries, they could only provide 1,000 places, and the rest would be up to Roland to figure out. As compensation, they completely lifted the restrictions on Roland's recruitment. As long as he could afford it, he could recruit as many soldiers as he wanted. Chapter 167. Although Donner and Sinner are two adjacent areas, communication between the two sides is not convenient. There is a long border area between Donner and Sinner. When the Silver Empire prospered and expanded under the rule of Littorio, the newly established powerful empire naturally turned its attention to the increasingly weak central kingdom next door. It is no surprise that the two neighboring empires broke out in war. Although the Silver Empire, as an emerging country, has a large number of powerful and active spellcasters, the central kingdom is not easy to bully. The powerful knights from various knight kingdoms inside responded to the call. I hope readers will remember our domain name Taiwan Novel Network. Afterwards, the two sides broke out in a bloody war that lasted for 3 years on the long border. And the final result of the war was this border area. After being destroyed by countless extraordinary people, this area was filled with various chaotic elements and became a dead land that was completely unsuitable for any living being to survive. Although it was not impossible for both sides to deal with this area, both sides tacitly did not deal with the border area, but made it a buffer zone between the two empires. And now the danger level of the border area has increased by dozens of times compared to the initial level. This tacit understanding lasted for more than 1,000 years until it was broken in recent years. The Central Kingdom collapsed in the Green Tide, and the Silver Empire no longer needed the existence of a buffer zone. At the same time, since the Rose War of the Silver Empire ended in peace talks, neither side was able to tear off the benefits from each other. In order to appease the soldiers who rose in the war and provide the agreed rewards, they only needed to promote a small number of soldiers to pioneer nobles and give them the border area. In this way, not only did they solve the problem of military merit, but they also expanded the territory, and at the same time, they could build a front line to fight against the Green Tide. At that time, if the military nobles died on the front line against the Green Tide, they could still take back the land opened up by the military nobles, and then they would win. Although these military nobles were not very satisfied with this result, it was better to have something than nothing, so they gritted their teeth and went to the border area. According to the plot of the game in the previous life, the ideas of the Silver family were realized, but not completely. They did rely on the Green Tide to recover some of the border nobles' territories, but under the joint pressure of the Green Tide and the Silver family, more border nobles chose to unite and resist together. Taking advantage of the instability of the Silver Empire, they formed a kingdom called the Blade Border, resisted the malice from the Silver family, and later even stabbed the Silver family in the back. Roland looked at the lively town in front of him and silently recalled the plot of his previous life. Although the future development of this world will definitely not be the same as the plot of his previous life, it still has a certain reference value. Although the future development is uncertain, the local resources will not fly. According to the plot of the previous life, Roland knows that this buffer zone is worth developing. In the control area of the Blade Edge in the previous life, a lot of mineral veins were dug out, and there was even a large mithril mineral vein. Therefore, if Roland is successful in Donner, he will also have to join in the division of the border area. While Roland was thinking, with the shouting and cursing, the chaotic elements in the border area in front of the town gradually subsided. Caravans, adventure groups, mercenary groups, or small teams like Roland, began to rush forward. The carriage that Roland was riding also moved slowly. Although the border area is a buffer zone, the exchanges between the two empires have not been completely cut off. Under the stimulation of interests, some spellcasters tried every means to calm the chaos in the border area and open up trade routes for exchanges. The passage that Roland passed in front of him was one of them. Although it is only allowed to pass once every 10 days, it is stable and safe. Roland looked at the dense crowds around him, then glanced at the chaotic elemental vortex not far away, and calmly closed the window. This road has another disadvantage, that is, there are so many people passing through it every time. Although Roland's carriage was hung with the mark of the Spellcaster Association, the road was so small that at most he could give Roland more space. After closing the window, Roland looked at Hela beside him. Hela sat beside him, meditating silently with her eyes closed. She was holding the crown of domination in her right hand, and thick dark elements were constantly flowing between her and the crown of domination. After confirming that she was fine, Roland also took out the magic book from the space bracelet and opened the Book of Wisdom. The maximum distance of the Book of Wisdom is at the border area. After Roland enters Donner, the Book of Wisdom will basically be unusable. After opening the Book of Wisdom, Roland entered the official public forum and posted the post he had been preparing since leaving Ginza. This was Roland's summary of all the Q/U0026A posts he had answered before, listing various common problems faced by spellcasters and their solutions, and providing some common knowledge for low-level spellcasters. At the bottom of the post, Roland also explained the situation that he was going to Donner and could no longer continue to speak on the forum. Although Roland initially answered questions on the forum just to recall his memories of surfing the forum in his previous life, he didn't need to waste time making this summary. However, the various thanks from the posters under each Q/U0026A post, as well as the various rewards they sent out, made Roland feel that perhaps he should respond. So, Roland did it. There was no benefit or reason, just a simple desire to do it. After successfully sending the post and seeing that someone had read and answered it, Roland closed the Book of Wisdom, removed it from the grimoire, and threw it into the space bracelet. It was no longer useful. After walking in the border area for more than 10 days, Roland and Hella finally crossed the border area and came to Donner. Roland led the carriage and looked up at the somewhat dilapidated wall and gate in front of him. This border gate is not as good as the one in the Northern Kingdom. It can only be used to intercept ordinary people. Any extraordinary person can directly pass through it. Roland shook his head, said nothing, and followed the flow of people to the gate. Since there were no goods on Roland's carriage, Roland and Hella did not need to pay a large amount of commodity tax like other people. After paying the basic head fee, the two of them passed through the gate smoothly. On November 11, 1444 of the Silver Calendar, an ordinary day, Roland and Hella walked through the border gate and officially stepped into Donner. Chapter 168. I hope readers will remember our domain name TaiwanNovelNetwork. After entering Donner, Roland did not waste time. He quickly sold the carriage, and with the identity of a spellcaster and the extra money, he exchanged 2 horses from a nearby caravan. Afterwards, the two rode their horses and rushed north day and night. The current chaotic situation of the coalition army is probably only a few years away. Roland needs to seize the time and take advantage of the chaotic situation to control as much land and population as possible, and form and train a strong army. Before the first meeting of the coalition army is held, Roland must obtain enough power and strength to get a ticket to the first meeting. Although according to the plot of the previous life, if there is no accident, the coalition army will be quite unstable internally until it is submerged by the green tide and completely driven out of Donner, and it will not be able to concentrate all its strength to fight against the green tide. Due to the complex internal composition, there are people who hate the green tide, and of course, there are also people who do not hate the green tide, such as the adventure groups and mercenary groups from Siner. Most of them have no hatred for the green tide. Therefore, after Eleanor led a wave of people to send them off, they were even less supportive of the counterattack plan against the green tide. Therefore, Roland basically did not have much hope for the united army, and it was good enough that he could not be dragged down. However, although Roland was not very interested in the united army, as a coalition jointly formed by almost all the remnants of the kingdom in Donner, the united army had a very high degree of legitimacy, and this was what Roland wanted. If Roland could get involved in the first meeting and get the official recognition of the united army, then it would also be good for the development of his future power. At least, before the united army collapsed, the flag of the united army still had some appeal. While Roland and Hella were running north, Roland also witnessed the chaos in Donner. Although the Allied forces have not given up the hope of counterattacking the green tide because Eleanor is still alive and with the support of the Silver Empire, the Allied forces can still effectively rule the controlled area. However, the refugees of the entire Donner are crowded in the Allied forces' current controlled area. The population is too large, and the main focus of the Allied forces is on the military. The administrative management can be said to be extremely chaotic. Although there is no large-scale starvation of civilians, large areas of refugee camps can be seen everywhere. In addition, a large number of bandits have appeared in the Allied forces' controlled area, burning, killing and looting everywhere. Roland encounters 7 to 10 waves of banditry every day on average. In addition to intercepting them on the road, Roland encounters more massacres in refugee camps. Although Roland is on his way, as long as he encounters such a situation, Roland will kill all the bandits, extract their memories, and then find their hometown to eradicate them. He can't save them for a lifetime, but it's okay to save them once. Since Roland would waste a little time every day, Roland and Hela arrived at the destination half a day later than Roland expected. Roland controlled the warhorse and slowly passed through the long refugee camp. Then, he frowned and looked at the dilapidated city in front of him. Although he knew that a city that could be directly thrown to a new spellcaster like him would not be very prosperous, it was too shabby. The walls were uneven, with holes everywhere, and the shabby walls could not even stop ordinary people, let alone intercepting extraordinary people. As for the residents in the city, although they were better than the refugee camp, they were all pale and thin civilians, and there were a lot of weak people lying on the streets of the city. Although Roland and Hela had been traveling for more than 10 days and killed a lot of bandits along the way, they were dusty and slightly bloody. However, the clothes on Roland and Hela also showed their unique identities. In Donner, ordinary people can't afford to wear high-end clothes like Roland and Hela. Therefore, the city also responded quickly. A first-level knight and a dozen soldiers hurried to Roland. Their equipment was not very good. Except for the first-level knight who had a set of worn-out iron armor and a standard long sword, the rest of the soldiers were not only unarmored, but also had simple wooden spears or forks in their hands. In addition to the equipment, their physical condition was not very good. The life breath of the first-level knight was a little weak. It was probably because he had been hungry for too long and his strength had decreased a lot. The other dozen soldiers were only slightly better than those pale and thin civilians. They looked quite energetic. While Roland was looking at them, the first-level knight was also observing the situation of Roland and Hela. After observing for a while, he took the initiative to approach Roland and said, "Excuse me, is it Mr. Roland and Mr. Hela?" Roland nodded, got off the horse, looked at him and said, "It's us." After hearing Roland's answer, the first-level knight was relieved and saluted Roland respectfully. Roland didn't waste time with him here. As he walked into the city, he asked him about the information about the city. Although the first-level knight was responsible for maintaining the safety of the city, he only had a dozen militiamen under his command. Therefore, he was not very clear about the specific situation of the city. However, in response to Roland's questions, he still told him all the information he knew. As a native resident of this kind of city, the first-level knight still provided a lot of valuable information. However, when Roland arrived at the city hall in the center of the city, he also roughly understood the situation of the city. In a word, it can be summarized as, too many people, little money, and too much trouble. Since there are only a few people in the city defense army, let alone maintaining order in the refugee camp outside, the order inside the city is not very stable. In addition, there are not many administrative staff left in the city hall. The city's administrative management agency can basically be described in 3 words at present, that is, non-existent. Standing in front of the city's granary, a gust of wind blew, and a layer of loose soil fell on the beams. The inside was so empty that even mice could starve to death. This place is really poor enough. Looking at the empty granary, Hela frowned and said helplessly, "No food left for us." Hela thought it would be poor, but she didn't expect it to be so poor. Not only did she not see a well-dressed guy in the whole city, but the granary also had no food. Roland had been prepared for this and was not very surprised. Looking at the empty granary, he said, "They are poor, but it's fine. They don't have to worry about anything. As long as they can eat, they are willing to do anything." Hela nodded in agreement. When the first-level knight heard Roland's words, a trace of excitement flashed in his eyes. "Is there a transport team transporting food behind?" I said, "How could they come with only 2 people?" Just when the first-level knight was secretly excited, Roland waved his hand, and countless food quickly filled the entire warehouse. Chapter 169. Since Roland was coming to Donner, he had made sufficient preparations. His and Hela's space bracelets were filled with all kinds of supplies. Although the amount of food bought was not much, if he was frugal, it would probably only be enough for a few days, but it was enough for Roland's early transition. The first-level knight looked at the warehouse that was suddenly filled with food in surprise, and he swallowed his saliva. Roland turned his head and looked at him, saying calmly, "Go recruit some people, prepare to open the warehouse to release food, tell everyone that the food will be released for free for 3 days. As for the rest, if you want to eat, you can work. I want to renovate and expand the city. As long as you are a person, I want you." The first-level knight looked at Roland, then at the full granary, nodded, and turned away decisively. After he left, Roland also looked at Hela and said, "Next, we will be busy. Are you ready?" "Yes." Hela nodded. Although Roland nominally joined the United Army, he actually joined the Locke Resistance Army, which was located in the northwest of East Nar, led by the exiled knight Locke and composed of countless exiled knights. These exiled knights basically had a blood feud with the Green Tide, and basically had experienced the destruction of their countries by the Green Tide. Therefore, the Locke Resistance Army was the most fanatical force in the United Army against the Green Tide. As long as they could fight the Green Tide, they didn't care about anything. So Roland chose this place. As long as he could show his ability to fight the Green Tide and establish his determination to fight the Green Tide, there would be countless exiled knights willing to be loyal to him. As long as Roland kept fighting the Green Tide, they would be Roland's sharpest blade. And all this had to start from this shabby city. After Roland arranged a magic circle in the granary to avoid the possibility of theft, the two left the granary and devoted themselves to the work of this city called Old Chi. Due to the almost non-existent administrative agency of Old Chi, Roland and Hela had to start everything from scratch. In the next few days, Roland and Hela worked 24 hours a day. First, through simple enchantment spells, a group of relatively honest people were selected from the city residents and refugee camps to fill the vacant low-level positions. Roland first provided them with food and cured their weak bodies due to hunger, so that they had enough physical strength and energy to execute his orders, and at the same time, they were able to suppress weak ordinary people. Although they didn't know anything, in order not to starve, they were also more obedient. They did whatever Roland said. Therefore, Roland covered the entire city and refugee camp with his perception, and relied on his upgraded biological brain to coordinate, and through the promoted communicators, he issued his orders to every person. Although Roland's administrative orders had a certain delay due to the running speed of the communicators, Roland's various administrative orders were still smoothly executed. Prepare grain, organize land reclamation, disaster relief, deal with refugees, expand the city, build new walls, adjust taxes, identify population and resources, renovate buildings in the city, build military camps, recruit and train new soldiers. Under Roland's micromanagement, including the refugee camps outside the city, the entire city was forced to operate. While Roland was micromanaging the entire city, Hela was also busy day and night. Although Hela didn't understand administration, as a spellcaster, Hela could do a lot. Under Roland's prompting, Hela struck hard at all the evil forces in the city and the refugee camps. Although the first-level knights and the city defense army might not be able to beat these evil forces, Hela, as a fourth-level spellcaster, could naturally easily destroy them directly on the physical level. At the same time, Hela sent out the three-ring undead and grey crows under her control, and remotely controlled them to carry out a comprehensive attack on all the bandit nests near Juki. It took only 2 or 3 days for Hela to destroy almost all the evil forces, sweep all the bandit nests nearby, and kill nearly 10,000 people. In addition to killing people, Hela is also responsible for maintaining order and emergency relief. Once there is a riot in any part of the city, if the communicator runs over too late, Roland will let her go there directly and use absolute violence to maintain order. Of course, these are not Hela's main tasks. Her most important task is to solve the food problem. Since Juki is located in the northwest area of Dongnar, it is relatively remote. If you want to buy food from the outside world, it is not only expensive, but also difficult to transport. Therefore, it is impossible to buy, and you can only think of other ways, such as spells. After killing people, Hela stays outside the city more often, plundering all usable materials everywhere, and absorbing and collecting various life forces. After that, it is to use these plundered materials and life forces, and produce one after another large pancakes that are enough to meet the needs of ordinary people through the strange props prepared in advance. These pancakes, which can meet the needs of an adult for a day, soon became the main food of the citizens and refugees of Juki. Although it doesn't taste good, it is a good thing to fill your stomach. They will not dislike it after experiencing hunger. Meal making, boy. As a wizard who is proficient in all kinds of spells, Roland naturally has spells to solve the food problem. Meal making, which was also jokingly called bread kneading in the previous life, can directly knead bread to fill the stomach by consuming magic power. This spell is a spell that extends from the magic of strange machines in the later stages of the game. Basically, every spellcaster will learn it. If a first-level spellcaster is proficient, he can almost meet the food needs of more than 50 people. Of course, Even if Hela is a 4th level spellcaster, it is impossible to meet the needs of the entire city by directly using magic power. Therefore, Hela will collect materials and life force everywhere, and use the matching strange machine props prepared by Roland to greatly reduce the consumption of magic power. At the beginning, when Hela was alone, she was still a little stressed, but after the work of collecting materials was thrown to ordinary people, Hela was also relieved and could spare some energy to study the city's daily affairs. While learning, Hela took some simple government affairs from Roland to her own hands. At the same time, Roland finally freed up some energy and began to train the administrative staff who had already started to work proficiently, and began to unload the complicated affairs on his body step by step. After spending more than 10 days training and letting them practice, Roland only needed to tell his officials what to do, and they would fill in the blanks and write plans for Roland to review. He would make some revisions to ensure that the general direction was correct. Although it took less than a month, the entire government affairs platform of Juki was barely set up, and all government affairs began to be handled in an orderly manner, and the poor masses and refugees in and outside the city began to play their due value. Chapter 170. For Roland, the main value of Old Chi City is to provide sufficient soldiers and a stable garrison. As for how it develops, it is just a matter of convenience. Roland will not deliberately develop it. After all, the Green Tide is still active on the front line. No matter how prosperous a city is, if it does not have sufficient military power, it will turn into ruins when the Green Tide approaches. Therefore, as the government team was initially established, Old Chi City was initially on the right track. All civilians inside and outside the city were carrying out various large-scale constructions under the command of grassroots officials and gradually integrating into the new order. Roland did not wait for Old Chi City to be completely stable, and immediately shifted the focus from administration to military. Outside Old Chi City, the military camp that had just completed the enclosure and built an empty shell began to operate under Roland's order. Although the conditions given by Roland were not very good, including food and accommodation, the monthly salary was only 1 silver coin, or 100 food coupons. 1 food coupon could be exchanged for a pancake. However, even if the conditions were not very favorable, there was still an endless stream of refugees and citizens coming to join the army outside the camp. Although at Roland's request, a lot of public projects in Old Chi City absorbed a lot of labor. However, there are still too many people in Old Chi City. Even if new projects are launched every day and people are recruited, all the public projects combined cannot absorb all the labor. Therefore, Roland had to divide them into shifts to ensure that everyone can do half a day's work. In order to prevent them from making trouble in the remaining half-day, Roland cut their food supply and only provided basic survival guarantees to ensure that they would not starve to death, but also would not eat too much. After all, some people eat too much and want to make trouble when they are bored. This is the experience Roland brought when he asked Hela to suppress the fight that suddenly broke out because of eating too much for the 7th time. Therefore, after cutting the food supply, if they want to eat enough, they either pass Roland's review and become part of the rapidly expanding government team in Old Chi City, or come to join the army and become Roland's new army soldiers. For civilians who don't know magic, the former need to pass Roland's magic review, and whether they can pass depends entirely on their looks, while the latter only depends on their physical fitness and willpower, and they can also rely on their own efforts. Therefore, as civilians from Donner, there are more civilians who choose to join the army because they are afraid of Roland's magic. Moreover, 1 big pancake can meet the needs of an adult for a day. If there are 100 pancakes a month, at least 3 adults can be fed. If they break it up and eat it, and dig some tree bark and wild vegetables, it is not a problem to double it. Although 1 silver coin is not bad, in the current Old Chi, no matter how much money you have, it is not as practical as a big pancake. Therefore, as Roland expected, more than 99% of the soldiers who joined the army chose food coupons. And because the food problem was solved by making big pancakes with the meal-making technique, Roland also had the confidence to continue to expand the army. 3,000 is too few, 5,000 is enough, and 10,000 or even more is not too much for him. At the recruitment office of Old Chi City, the only first-level knight in Old Chi City was responsible for recruitment with dozens of soldiers, and was also responsible for maintaining good order. Sitting at the table, the soldier looked at the civilian in front of him, pointed to a square crystal on the table, and said, "Put your hand on it." Some of the timid civilians heard the soldier's words and honestly stretched out their right hands and pressed them on the crystal. Then, the soldier pressed the button on the side of the crystal. A microray appeared under the table and followed the civilian's right hand that touched the crystal to conduct a full-body examination. After spending more than 10 seconds to check, the microray quickly dissipated, and the results of the examination also appeared on the crystal. There was no detailed and complex data, only a light red light. After all, the soldiers could not understand the specific data, so Roland directly used colors to divide them. This was just a simple inspection and classification of the civilians' physical fitness and talents. Even if their physical fitness and talents were particularly poor, they would not be eliminated immediately. The soldier looked at the light of the crystal, pressed another button to reset the crystal result, and turned around, pointing to a passage with a red sign behind him and said, "Red, go through the red door. If you can reach the end of the passage within 1 minute, you will pass. Don't ask how long 1 minute is. Just run and you'll be done." The civilian hesitated. "Hurry up, the next one is waiting." Seeing the civilian hesitate, the soldier urged impatiently. Hearing the soldier's urging, the civilian didn't dare to say anything more. He stood up quickly and walked into the passage behind the red sign in small steps. "Next one." Following the voice of the soldier behind him, the civilian swallowed his saliva. After taking a deep breath, he ran all the way to the depths of the passage. As he ran all the way, the passage suddenly lit up, and various magic arrays quickly unfolded and began to slowly exert pressure on the civilian. Fear mind, gravity field, dullness, weakness. The negative spells that were weakened countless times were added to him. At first, it was just a little bit of influence, but as he continued to go deeper, the influence of the spells became more and more profound and strong. Under the effect of the spell, he went from walking very fast in the beginning to having to grit his teeth and move forward step by step in the end. Since he didn't know it was the effect of the spell, he could only guess that he was too tired from time to time or for some other reason. However, thinking of the 100 food coupons after joining the army, he didn't want to endure hunger anymore, so he gritted his teeth, carried various negative buffs, and moved forward step by step. Fortunately, Roland was just conducting a simple selection after all, and the standard was not set too high. Therefore, with his persistence, he still managed to hold on and walked out of the passage. The moment he walked out of the passage, all the negative buffs on his body disappeared. At the same time, the weak life force was injected into his body from his feet, quickly replenishing and stimulating his extremely tired body. Hoo! After walking out of the passage, he breathed a sigh of relief and noticed the marks on his body while panting. Countless mud mixed with sweat was constantly pouring out of his body. He almost vomited just by smelling it. Just as he was about to look up and take a look at the situation around him, a person crawled out of the passage beside him. Yes, he crawled out. He touched the mud beside his eyes, and watched the man holding his head high, using his hands and feet, biting his lips, dragging blood all over the ground, and crawling out of the passage bit by bit. After desperately crawling out of the passage, mud began to flow out of the man's body, but he ignored it, raised his head, and made a hoarse voice. "Did I pass?" "You passed." A voice sounded in front of him, and after hearing this, the man finally couldn't hold on and finally lowered his head. The civilian looked in front of him, and a soldier with a cloth wrapped in iron and a mouth came over. "Follow." After speaking to the civilian, the soldier picked up the guy on the ground and muttered, "It's the first time I've seen someone crawling in." Chapter 171. Standing in the square of the military camp, Roland drilled the soldiers while covering the entire military camp with his perception. Therefore, Roland naturally saw the guy who crawled out of the screening channel. Although his physical fitness and talent were particularly poor, his willpower was unexpectedly firm. Roland was also very surprised by this unexpected guy. "I only gave him a few dollars, and he worked so hard?" Roland couldn't understand why he worked so hard. Old Chi City can be said to be thriving in Roland's hands. As long as he is willing to work hard, it will definitely not be a problem to eat and survive. Even the elderly and children have work to do. As long as they are not lazy dogs, they can do some easy and simple chores like cleaning and picking up garbage, and eating will definitely not be a problem. After all, Roland is not a devil. As long as he is willing to work, no matter how much work he does, he will definitely have a meal. Of course, if he has no ability to work at all, Roland will support him for free. So, what is he looking for? For that silver coin? Or 100 food coupons? Roland couldn't figure it out, so he decided to go and see what he was like. A strong will, a good seedling, worth Roland's trip. Whether it is the two extraordinary paths of knight or spellcaster, to be honest, the talent of physical fitness is actually a little useful at the low level. Once promoted to the 4th level and completed sublimation, unless it is like Hela, who has an unparalleled talent, there is basically no so-called talent gap. On the contrary, willpower is more important. If he has no problem, Roland can try to cultivate him, spend some time and resources to improve his talent to the average level, maybe this way he can cultivate a good knight. Thinking of this, Roland awakened the undead created from the corpses of criminals in the barracks, and projected part of his will onto it. Then, under Roland's control, the undead walked out of the room and strode towards the recruits. Since Roland had used the undead quite often in the barracks, the people in the barracks were not surprised by a corpse that could move. After being trained intensively by Roland, they no longer had much energy to care about a corpse. They were all busy with their own affairs. Only a few new recruits who had just joined and were full of energy would be a little frightened and hesitant, but it had little impact. Soon, Roland controlled the undead to come to the recruits. After accepting the trembling inspection and review of the soldiers, Roland successfully entered the recruits and arrived at the bedside of the person who crawled out. He should be thankful that in order to avoid signs of death during the selection and intensive training of soldiers, Roland arranged a large magic circle in the entire barracks. Once he detected that someone's life breath was particularly weak, he would be infused with life force. Otherwise, he would have died in the passage long ago after losing so much blood. Looking at the boy with a stable breath, Roland stretched out his hand, used the undead corpse as a transfer, and cast a low-level positive energy spell on the boy. After all, he volunteered to join the army. Since he had no ill intentions, Roland would not directly extract his soul for inspection. Therefore, Roland chose a mild positive energy enchantment spell. Roland constructed a dream and hypnotized him silently. Then, he began to ask him why he joined the army. Although his willpower was strong, he was just an ordinary person after all, and he was sleeping and defenseless, so he could not resist Roland at all. Therefore, Roland easily figured out his situation. The boy in front of him was named Alfonso. He was born in a peasant family. His parents were healthy, and he had a sister in a house. Although his life was not very rich, it was a happy life. Then, the green tide destroyed everything he had. Under the wave of green-skinned orcs, their family was forced to flee their homes like other ordinary families in Donner and became refugees. During the escape, his mother was torn in half by a green-skinned orc who suddenly appeared from the woods, and his father, in order to protect him and his sister, chose to stay behind. He could only hold back his tears and pain, and fled out of the woods with his sister in a panic. When he and his sister fled out of the woods, his father's scream soon came out of the woods and quickly stopped. With both his parents dead, he could only flee with the crowd, from the west to the east, and then from the south to the north. He did not fail to encounter enemies along the way, but he successfully protected himself and his sister by fighting desperately. Until the last few days, he fled to Juki, and he could not run anymore, so he found a place here to settle down temporarily. And after settling down, he and his sister were targeted, and the gangsters in the refugee camp beat them up in the dark night. Then, that day happened to be the day when Roland and Hela came, and before dawn the next day, Hela quickly passed the gangster. The good news is that he is fine, and the bad news is that his sister is in trouble. When he found his sister had both hands chopped off and became disabled. Roland did not give up on disabled people in similar situations. He raised them for free, gave them hope, treated them, and allowed them to regrow the outer shells of their limbs. However, since Roland didn't have that much power to waste on them, and he didn't lack labor, most of their new limbs were still just decorations, and they needed time and nutrition to slowly develop again. However, Alfonso still thought it was his own incompetence. If he could be as strong as Hela, how could his sister be captured by the gang? So, in order to gain strength, provide his sister with sufficient food, and accelerate regeneration and development, he chose to join the army. For his relatives? Roland nodded slightly. It seemed that he had no problem and could try to cultivate him. He lifted the dream constructed for Alfonso, and then linked the magic circle in the military camp and mobilized part of the life force. At the same time, he took a look at Alfonso's talent and mobilized the dark elements in the surrounding environment. Then, the life force and the dark elements poured into his body together. Finally, a trace of blessing floated out of Roland's space bracelet, crossed the distance, and was injected straight into Alfonso's body. Under the catalysis of the blessing and Roland's operation, his talent began to slowly rise. After raising his talent to an average level, Roland withdrew his power. Although Alfonso was miserable, Roland would only give him a chance to compete. Unless he could stand out next time. Chapter 172. Late at night. In the military camp square illuminated by the moonlight, some recruits were constantly training in the square. Most of the recruits had just entered the military camp and did not know much, so most of them only did long-distance running training around the square to exercise their physical fitness. Only a few instructors whose physical fitness was obviously better than the long-distance running recruits took wooden weapons to practice with each other. Since Roland arranged a gravity array for training in each square, basically an adult would sweat profusely after running one lap, and would basically lie down directly after running 2 laps without any assistance. Google searched can. At this time, the large array arranged by Roland in the entire military camp came into play. Once the recruits ran out of physical strength, the life force would surge out and be injected into the recruits' bodies to continue to support the recruits' high-intensity training. Life force will not replenish the physical strength of the recruits, but will provide minimum support to ensure that the recruits have the physical strength to continue to move. More life force will be used to stimulate the tired and relaxed bodies of the recruits, so as to strengthen the training effect of the recruits. Of course, in addition to training, the recruits with a sharp increase in physical fitness also need a lot of nutritional supplements. 1 pancake can meet the daily needs of ordinary people, and they have to eat at least a dozen pancakes a day. In addition to the pancakes, they have to take a medicinal bath every 2 days to treat the hidden injuries left by their high-intensity training and strengthen their bodies. This training method is quite effective. Basically, after running for a day, the physical fitness will be significantly improved. Therefore, although the high-intensity training during the day made the soldiers wail everywhere, because they could feel that their physical fitness was improving at a visible speed every day, so under this immediate sense of gain, all the soldiers gritted their teeth and held on. After all, Donner is the origin of knights, and it has a tradition of martial arts. In addition, under the pressure brought by the green tide, the soldiers are naturally eager for strength. No matter how tired or painful it is, they will not give up this opportunity. The instructors who were rotated here in the recruit camp are naturally aware of this. After all, they also went through this. Therefore, the attitude of the instructors is, since they will not die anyway, they will train to death, and they have increased the training intensity set by Roland. Basically, after the recruits are trained fiercely by the instructors during the day, they will basically sleep to death in bed when they finally don't have to train at night. However, there are always some people who are more stubborn, such as these soldiers who do not sleep at night and train in the square. Due to the existence of life force, it is actually no problem to not let the soldiers sleep. However, their bodies cannot sleep, but they may not be able to hold on mentally. What if they become stupid from training? Therefore, Roland does not advocate extra training at night. However, some determined soldiers can practice more if they can pass the extra training review every day. As for the instructors who have mastered the breathing method, Roland didn't care. Anyway, the daytime training was not difficult for them. On the track in the square, Alfonso was gritting his teeth and running step by step with the support of life force. He felt as if his whole body had lost consciousness and was acting completely on instinct. The last lap, the last lap, the last lap. Rest after running this lap. Alfonso repeatedly hinted to himself in his heart. Even if he didn't know how many times he had said similar hints, this hint could still encourage him to continue to persevere. His physical fitness was much worse than that of the same batch of recruits. In the daytime training, he often couldn't keep up with the main force, so he had to make more efforts than others. Although he had never heard of being kicked out of the barracks, as the worst performer in the same batch of recruits, Alfonso was still full of pressure. He didn't dare to bet whether he would be the first to be kicked out. Whether for strength or his sister, he had to stay. After he ran another lap, he recalled his sister and his father who died tragically. As he gritted his teeth and continued to run, some scattered dark elements were attracted by his negative emotions and fell into his body silently in the night. For all this, Roland, who was handling the government affairs of the old Chi city while there was nothing to do in the military camp at night, naturally saw it clearly. In this regard, he just watched and did nothing. The recruits who were training in the square had their own tragedies and their own persistence. Basically, everyone's negative emotions would attract dark elements, which were the extension of their hatred and also the nutrients for their bodies. Therefore, Roland just recorded them silently and did not interfere. In the process of recruit training, Ordinary people generally only need to train in the recruit camp for 10 days and half a month, and their physical fitness can reach Roland's minimum requirements. Once a certain number of recruits who meet the requirements are reached, they will be taken away from the recruit camp and uniformly receive the teaching of night breathing method. Roland personally taught the first few batches of recruits who came to learn the breathing technique. Later, Roland selected dozens of talented soldiers who had fully learned the breathing technique from these batches of recruits to serve as instructors. So, the new recruits behind were handed over to these instructors for teaching. Roland could only pay some attention to this side to ensure that if any accident happened, he could get out immediately. The breathing method Roland took out was not very advanced. It was just a very basic breathing method. Apart from having no disadvantages and being easy to learn, it had no advantages. If you only rely on this basic breathing method, you can only become a second-level knight at most, and it will be the weakest among the second-level knights. However, even the most basic breathing method is a ticket to transcendence. As long as the recruits can learn it, they can at least learn to use elements to improve themselves. In this way, their physical fitness will also begin to soar and evolve. Moreover, after the body evolves, the learning ability of the recruits will be significantly improved, whether it is literacy or military training, it will be much faster. After they complete literacy, remember military regulations, maintain order, master the skills of using various weapons, and complete the various indicators set by Roland, Roland will formally teach them some low-level techniques. At present, except for the original first-level knights in Joki City, no soldier has passed all the tests. However, it will be soon. The fastest soldier is only a few tests away, so Roland is not in a hurry. Roland is not interested in forming an ordinary army. In today's coalition army, there is a huge difference between the attention paid to an ordinary army of several thousand people and an extraordinary army. The former will not be valued by any force, while the latter can have a place even in the main army of the coalition army. Moreover, Roland knows that if it is just to defend the Green Tide, the ordinary army can still be used, but if it is to counterattack the Green Tide, the ordinary army will not be very good. Therefore, Roland decided to train an extraordinary army in Joki. With Roland's current conditions, it is impossible to have all the members at the first level. However, Roland's bottom line is, 1 in 1,000 soldiers become first-level knights, and the rest of the soldiers all learn basic breathing methods and master 1 or 2 techniques. Chapter 173. In addition to the large-scale knight training for ordinary soldiers, Roland naturally did not give up on the training of spellcasters. Although Donner is the hometown of knights, the blood of Donner people has been continuously influenced by several legendary knights. Therefore, most Donner people are more suitable to be knights rather than spellcasters. However, there are so many people in Donner, and there are always places that legends cannot reach. In addition, Donner people intermarry with Signer people and Northerners. Therefore, although there are few Donner people with spellcasting talents, some talents can still be selected. For these spellcasters, Roland did not let them go to the recruit training camp to improve their physical fitness. He directly allocated an area in the military camp for them and gave them the basic meditation method, so that they could start meditation practice directly. For these spellcasters, Roland did not intend to train them as carefully as he trained Hela, nor did he intend to train them to become a legal spellcaster that meets the definition of the Tower of Truth like Signer. Roland wanted to train war mages who specialize in war. If ordinary spellcasters are scholars and researchers, then war mages are soldiers. Of course, Roland did not completely eliminate their innovations. As long as they could meet Roland's requirements and practice the spells that Roland selected for them, Roland would not care about what they wanted to do. However, even so, due to the atmosphere of Donner, some soldiers with spellcasting talents refused to become spellcasters. In this regard, Roland did not force them, but respected their choices and threw them into the recruit camp or kicked them out of the barracks. In the end, Roland screened for most of the day, and there were less than 100 soldiers with spellcasting talents and willing to become spellcasters. Moreover, compared with the smooth popularization of breathing methods on the knight's side, the meditation method here is full of difficulties. Although there is no difference between the two paths of knights and spellcasters, the threshold for spellcasters is indeed much higher than that of knights. The breathing method of a knight can be trained hard, but the meditation method of a spellcaster really depends on talent and wisdom. Even if there are auxiliary props, it is still very difficult for an ordinary person to enter a meditative state and capture his soul. Moreover, the danger of meditation is the highest. If the breathing method is not practiced well, the body will be damaged. You can eat something good to replenish the body and rest for a few days. But meditation may hurt your soul if you are not careful. At that time, you can either spend a lot of money to buy alchemical potions to nourish the soul, or you can only lie down for a month or two and wait for the soul to recover slowly. Therefore, even in Sinner, the number of spellcasters is much less than that of knights. Therefore, even if these soldiers under Roland who know nothing try to meditate for several days with the meditation method, less than 20 people can successfully capture the soul and complete the first meditation. However, fortunately, Roland prepared a large number of alchemical potions in the space bracelet in advance, and with his personal guidance, these reserve battle mages have all been on the right track after spending almost a month. While Roland was training the army, Hela was naturally not idle. After the makeshift team of Old Chi was established and expanded rapidly, Hela no longer handled government affairs every day, and in terms of food, Hela had nothing to do. Since the makeshift team of Old Chi provided Hela with sufficient manpower, Hela basically did not need to do the material collection herself. As for the extraction of life force, Hela did not need to do it after commanding the workers under her command and arranging dozens of large and small magic arrays. All the work can be handed over to ordinary workers, and Hela only needs to be responsible for monitoring to avoid any accidents or corruption. Therefore, after freeing up her hands, Hela began to prepare for the equipment of the army. Although there are many mineral veins in Old Chi City, most of these mineral veins have been abandoned due to the green tide. Even if more people are sent to deal with these mineral veins, not much resources can be dug out for a while. Moreover, all the blacksmiths in Old Chi City have run away, and there are only a few left. It is basically impossible to rely on them to create sufficient weapons and equipment. Therefore, Hela chose another method, planting trees. After Roland made the decision to establish a force, he considered the issue of weapons and equipment when he went to Donner. Although strange machines are the answer to the future version, in the current era, only the dwarves in the North Sea have the technical ability to form a strange machine army. Although Roland also knows a little about strange machines, and his knowledge is more advanced than that of the dwarves, he can't always focus all his energy on making strange machines. Moreover, without a strange machine master accompanying the army, how to do the daily maintenance of strange machines? Therefore, after thinking again and again, Roland gave up the idea of building a strange machine army. Before having a stable territory in the capital to attract and deceive a dwarf tribe to come and join, the strange machine army can think about it. Therefore, after checking his own conditions, Roland turned his attention to the plants he cultivated in the Kess Mountains a few years ago, golden trees and blue leaf trees. These trees can just be used, especially the golden tree, whose main purpose is to make armor. The golden bark is light, comfortable, and has excellent magic resistance and physical defense properties. It is undoubtedly an excellent choice for making armor. Even if it is only processed and hardened into armor, it is much stronger than ordinary armor. If it is enchanted, the defense will be even stronger. In addition to the bark, other parts of the golden tree are also useful. The leaves can be used as raw materials for making food. Moreover, as an extraordinary tree, the amount of life force that can be drawn every day is not small. As for the blue leaf tree used for paper making, Roland did not let it go. It would be good to use it to make a set of paper underwear for the soldiers. Maybe it can save their lives. If the golden tree armor is penetrated, the paper underwear can still resist. In addition, in terms of weapons, Roland also specially cultivated new extraordinary vegetation, ironwood, a special tree with a black body and no leaves. The hardwood it produces is more suitable for making weapons. Since Roland was busy training soldiers, the planting of these vegetation was naturally handed over to Hela. Therefore, after leaving the task of rolling the pie to others, Hela has been busy planting and promoting the growth of these vegetation. At the same time, she also has to command her subordinates to collect bark and leaves, carry out various processing, and continuously produce various weapons and equipment. Just as Roland and Hela put all their energy on the military, the administrative expansion of Juki was also proceeding in an orderly manner. Since Juki's makeshift team has already taken shape, except for some major issues that Roland needs to occasionally take some time to solve, it can basically operate independently. Especially because Roland is their boss, as ordinary people, they can't hide anything from Roland. This means fairness. As long as they do a good job and have achievements, Roland will promote them. If there is really no position, he will give rewards. For example, Roland will give several officials who do the best work, each of them a chance to become extraordinary. Although Roland plans to give every official a chance to become extraordinary in the future, after all, no matter what job an extraordinary person does, he is much better than ordinary people, but at present, Roland still needs to focus on training the army. Therefore, the number of places available to officials is relatively limited. Under the temptation of extraordinary power, the officials of Old Chi City also worked frantically to get a chance. If they were lazy, did not do a good job, or even wanted to deceive their superiors and subordinates, and were corrupt, the former would just be kicked out and replaced, while the latter would be killed directly. Therefore, even without Roland and Hela's deliberate promotion, after the makeshift team of Old Chi City had incorporated all the refugee camps, in order to gain more merits, they also looked at the villages around the city and took the initiative to send people to prepare to control all these villages that nominally belonged to Old Chi. Chapter 174. In this chaotic world caused by the green tide, ordinary people may not even recognize the Alliance army, let alone someone like Roland who came directly from the air, so it is useless to reason with them. And pure disaster relief cannot be carried out. The reason is simple: the people do not believe that you will distribute food for no reason. Displaced people do not believe in the benefits of free food. They believe that relying on their own strength can feed their families. Therefore, Roland's work for relief policy is more suitable for Donner's current situation. Anyway, they all have skills. Since you don't trust Roland, then just work for Roland. It is more reasonable to give them work and food, and also give them some small money along the way to give them more hope and stimulate business circulation and so on. Teach them to build houses, give them food, and when they finish building, tell the refugees that the wages previously paid to you can be used to buy the houses you built. If it is not enough, you only need to pay a deposit, and the city hall can rent it to you first. I will pay it back later when I have money. Similarly, if you want to farm but don't have the money to buy land, the government can also grant you the reclaimed land. According to Roland's farming order, 40% of the tax and 10% of the lease fee will only be the national tax after 5 years. However, although the land was sold to them, Roland also made a patch to prohibit the sale of land. If you want to sell the land, you can only sell it to the city hall. Moreover, the amount of land that each person can purchase is limited. Roland had planned it well. However, Roland had a small problem when it came to distributing money. Basically, no one wanted the copper coins he exchanged specifically for Zener. Roland originally had a good idea. He would pay workers wages, deduct their consumption of food, and then give them some copper coins as final wages. As a result, most of the hungry people did not want copper coins. In addition to some copper coins given out a few days ago, later, after hearing that the soldiers could get food stamps in exchange for flatbread, they all asked to exchange them for food stamps. After officials at all levels reported it to Roland, he naturally agreed to their request. Anyway, it's not a troublesome thing. If you want money, just take money. If you want food stamps, just take food stamps. At the worst, they can be allowed to use food stamps to pay taxes and buy houses and farmland. Fortunately, the number of Roland's coins is limited. If they choose food stamps, Roland's coins can support him for a while longer, giving him more time to continue to develop. Thinking of this, in order to get more people to exchange for food stamps, Roland can give a discount of 10% more when taking food stamps. Roland's decision successfully made almost all the people choose to exchange for food stamps. People don't want copper coins, and soldiers don't want silver coins. This leads to a lot of copper coins specially exchanged for Roland's space bracelet, and the silver coins are almost useless. After staying in Juki for several months, Roland's millions of copper coins and silver coins stored in Juki's warehouse not only did not decrease, but actually increased a lot. Although some workers and soldiers chose to take money, because Roland asked officials to open grain stores all over Juki to meet the people's need to exchange grain stamps for big cakes, and at the same time, in order to recover the currency, Roland also allowed use coins to buy pie. Therefore, after knowing that they could spend money to buy food, the common people in Juki directly dug out their wealth and couldn't wait to empty out the storage of food stores. In order to alleviate this panic buying trend, Roland also raised the price of food several times, but it was still of no use. As long as the goods were available, they would be sold out instantly. In the end, Roland could only choose to limit purchases. Food stamps could be exchanged at will, but if he wanted to buy with money, there was only a certain amount per day. This has also caused the value of food stamps to increase again, and more people choose to exchange for food stamps. In the end, this resulted in the current situation. Roland's wages were getting smaller and smaller, but the amount of gold and silver recovered had remained stable. At the same time, Food stamps anchored by big cakes became a general equivalent widely accepted and circulated in Juki and nearby villages, replacing gold and silver currency. In this regard, Roland also accepted this situation half-heartedly. After all, food stamps are just paper, which is much easier to deal with than gold and silver currency. The only problem is, this kind of food stamps, which are only circulated under Roland's control, have eliminated almost all private trade between the people and the outside world. Because although food stamps are very useful at Roland's side and can be exchanged for basically anything, no one outside will recognize them. However, Roland doesn't care about this very much. After all, Dongnar is in such chaos now. How can there be a caravan taking risks for a small profit in private trade? Basically, those who dare to run around for trade now are large caravans. They look down on small profits from private trade, and they all do large-scale business directly with the government in order to seek huge profits. Naturally, Roland did not refuse. He placed large orders with every large chamber of commerce that passed by Juki, ranging from various infrastructure materials, medicinal materials and tools, to various high-level slaves who mastered production technology, as well as various intelligence and publicity. After the Great Chamber of Commerce filled in the last shortcomings of Old Kikken, the development of Old Kikken was also on the fast track. Now there is a busy scene everywhere in Juki, and there is even a false prosperity. At a glance, there is a lot of traffic and prosperity. The reason why it is said to be false is because once Roland withdraws from the grain investment at this time, the entire Old Chi will enter a state of depression and even collapse quickly. However, as long as it persists for a few more months and waits for a batch of farmland grains to mature and be harvested, even if there won't be any problem even if the grain input is removed. And if everything goes well, then, after the first batch of grain is harvested, the Old Chi city will become Roland's stable rear base, which can continuously provide Roland with taxes and soldiers, and future plans will have a solid foundation. Of course, the big changes in the Old Chi can't be hidden from the outside world, especially when Roland did not deliberately cover it up and allowed the Chamber of Commerce to enter and exit public places. The prosperity of the Old Chi was also spread by the caravans coming and going. Although it is not clear how Roland did it, the prosperity of the Old Chi naturally attracted attention from all sides. However, Roland dared to do this, and naturally he had his confidence. After 3 months of training, the basic training of the soldiers has been almost completed, and then it's time to take them to see blood. Moreover, the Old Chi is still too small, and he needs an excuse to expand within the coalition army. So during this period of time, Roland has also made preparations. Whoever dares to cause trouble can only trouble them to death. Roland is looking forward to which unlucky neighbor will do it to him first. Chapter 175. Everything went just as Roland planned. Through the early warning network that Roland had set up at the border of the control zone, when the first small force quietly entered Roland's territory, Roland discovered their existence. However, before Roland could mobilize his troops, he discovered another invading force in another direction. Compared to the former, which only sent a small force of less than 100 people to sneak in, the latter was very bold and directly sent a force of more than 5,000 soldiers to kill in. Although more than 4,000 of the more than 5,000 soldiers were unarmored, thin militiamen, they were no threat, just like the 100-man squad. Roland could kill them all by himself, but he might not be able to wipe them all out. After thinking for a while, Roland made a plan. The former 100-man squad was dealt with by Hela and some people, while the latter was led by Roland himself. With Roland's order, the soldiers in the entire barracks also moved. A total of 8,000 soldiers, under the leadership of officers at all levels, put on golden armor, picked up weapons, quickly formed military formations, and poured out of the exit of the military camp in an orderly manner. Under Roland's leadership, they trampled on the wide bluestone road and marched quickly into the distance. Since Roland did not hide the traces of mobilizing the army, the workers on the busy construction sites also saw the neat and uniform military formations running through the bluestone roads they built. After hearing the neat footsteps, a worker stopped his work, wiped the sweat off his face, and looked up at the golden soldiers running on the road. He looked a little scared and whispered to his companion who had also stopped beside him. "Is this going to be a war again? I remember that the green tide was stopped. I heard from the people who escaped a few days ago that it was indeed stopped, and this direction should not be going to fight the green tide." The companion wiped the sweat from his face, responded, licked his dry lips, looked at the soldiers who gradually disappeared from sight, and continued. "Running really fast. Who are they going to fight? The worker drank a sip of water, buried his head and continued to work, while discussing with him in a low voice. Who knows? Maybe they fought with other knights. Don't worry about it. Today's work is done. Hurry up and exchange all the food coupons for food. If the wizard loses and the new knight is not a human being, we will run quickly. The companion looked around, approached the worker, and reminded him in a low voice. Hearing his companion's words, the worker muttered in a low voice while working skillfully. Then let the wizard win. At least the wizard is willing to give us a bite of food. While the workers were whispering to their companions, on the other side of the construction site, a worker who was also working hard looked up at them, and a hint of malice flashed in his eyes. Not far away, the guards responsible for maintaining order on the construction site watched him silently. Although Roland and Hela had carried out a major cleanup of the old Qi at the beginning and killed all the evil forces that were doing evil, in the past few months, many refugees have also poured in from the outside world. Among these refugees, although most of them have integrated into the new order of the old Qi very harmoniously, there are always some guys who are malicious and produce negative emotions. Since they are all ordinary people, Roland has no time to check them one by one, but it is not good to kill them all directly. After all, they are just dissatisfied and have not started to do evil. So, although it is not clear what their situation is, Roland marked them all and included them in the key monitoring list. This time, in addition to training the army, he was also setting traps for them. Under the surveillance of the guards, as long as they thought that Roland and Hela were gone and no one cared about Juki, they would be killed if they dared to cause trouble. Of course, if they didn't cause trouble, they would be fine. Although the guards of Juki did not receive high-intensity training in the military camp, they only had some very basic training, but it was more than enough to deal with ordinary people. In the shade of the woods, an officer wearing light armor was loudly directing his subordinates to set up camp. Under his constant scolding, the militiamen who were forcibly recruited could only move slowly. In a messy chaos, they barely completed the camping. The officer looked at the messy camp angrily, cursed a few words, and then whipped a hapless militiaman hard before returning to his own military camp. After all, they were just ordinary militiamen who were temporarily recruited. Even if they tried their best to select young and strong men, in the current situation in Donner, most of them were pale and thin, and weak. It was good enough that they could not fall behind. As for why they did not attack at the first time? The officer also wanted to, but with the quality of these militiamen, if they did not rest, they would probably collapse at the touch of a button when the fight started. After cooking on the spot and having a big meal, the low morale of the troops also recovered a little. However, looking at the scorching sun at noon, even if the servants kept blowing the fans to cool him down, the officer still felt bored and hot, and the sweat on his forehead never stopped. Otherwise, wait until it is not so hot in the afternoon before continuing to march. As if seeing the officer's hesitation, he came over with a confidant behind him and whispered beside him. Sir, these militiamen have lost their spirits under the scorching sun. If they march now, some of them might die. In my opinion, it is better to wait until it is cooler before continuing the march. Yes. The officer looked at the confidant, and then at the militiamen lying in the barracks. That's right, so in order to avoid unnecessary casualties, let's postpone the march. Sir, you are really kind-hearted. Yes, 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 sir, you really love your soldiers. Listening to the flattery of the confidants around him, the officer laughed happily, and then he turned around without hesitation and returned to his tent. It was really hard to stand under such a strong sun. Not far away, Roland looked at the officer who turned back to the tent, and he was numb after hearing their whole conversation. No, he is a second-level knight after all, can't he stand the heat at all? Originally, Roland was going to set an ambush on their march, but he didn't expect him to do it directly. Roland shook his head speechlessly, and then ordered his troops to be mobilized. In this case, let's take the initiative to attack. Besides a second-level knight and a few first-level knights, the rest are just worthless and pose no threat. Chapter 176. At this point I hope readers will remember our domain name TaiwanNovelNetwork. Since everyone has mastered the breathing method and received 3 months of high-intensity training, the quality of these 7,000 soldiers is quite high. The worst has reached the quality level of a knight's squire, and the best has only reached the first level. However, this does not mean that they have reached the average level of the same level of extraordinary people on Donner's side. As extraordinary people trained by Roland quickly, if they fight alone, none of them are exceptions. They are all the worst among the extraordinary people of the same level. At most, they can only bully wild knights with no background. If they face elite knights trained by the Donner Knight family, they will win if they are not killed in 3 moves. After all, the extraordinary people from the Knight family are trained as elites, with inheritance and a lot of things to learn. How can the quick-trained knights trained by Roland fight against them? However, Roland is already very satisfied that he can reach this level in 3 months. Under Roland's command, 7,000 well-trained soldiers quickly moved. Under the constant emphasis on order and command in the military camp, although most of the soldiers were a little nervous as it was their first time on the battlefield, they still followed Roland's orders based on their previous training and surrounded the enemy silently. Seeing that almost all the enemy's camp was in a mess, and no one noticed even though the soldiers had surrounded them, Roland was speechless. There were many times when the 7,000 soldiers made mistakes and made noises because of nervousness, but no one noticed. Isn't this too outrageous? Roland couldn't understand it, so after the soldiers completed the encirclement, he took the initiative to extend his perception and confirmed the real situation inside the enemy's camp. After confirming that the enemy's camp really had no defenses or ambushes, and was just a simple vegetable, Roland sighed and directly issued an order to attack. With this quality, just run over it. After Roland's order to attack was issued, the 7,000 soldiers were no longer cautious. They mobilized their extraordinary powers, strengthened their bodies, and activated their weapons and equipment. As the golden light lit up around the enemy camp, strong soldiers wrapped tightly in golden armor, holding swords in their left hands and shields in their right hands, rushed to the camp in an orderly manner. Although the soldiers no longer covered their tracks after receiving the order to attack, it was not until the soldiers approached the camp 3 meters away, almost face to face, that a militiaman who walked out of the camp and was about to find a place to defecate found something wrong. He held his pants with one hand, looking confusedly at the approaching golden cans in front of him, and after a few seconds of stunned, he let out a huge cry. Enemy attack! His voice instantly made the camp behind him noisy. The militiaman who collapsed to the ground and rested in the camp became agitated in an instant, looking for people, looking for weapons, and asking where the enemy was. It was a mess all of a sudden. However, although the quality of the militia was not good, the ordinary soldiers were still qualified. After receiving the warning, the 2 first-level knights quickly took their guards and organized ordinary soldiers to defend the core camp. At the same time, they gathered the nearby militia and used them as cannon fodder. But they were still too slow. They had just organized the ordinary soldiers and had not gathered a few militias, and the golden can soldiers coming from all directions rushed to them. Several first-level knights looked at the golden cans and frowned. These soldiers in golden armor were too rampant. It seemed that they didn't take them seriously at all. While surrounding them, they also sent people to suppress and gather the fleeing militia. As for the extraordinary aura on the golden soldiers, they didn't think that the soldiers were all extraordinary people. They should have been strengthened by the wizards with witchcraft, right? According to their previous experience, the wizard's witchcraft has a duration. Therefore, since the golden soldiers did not take action, they did not take the initiative to attack. If they wanted to waste time, they would waste it. Anyway, they didn't expect the militia to play a big role. They were just cannon fodder, or tools to clean the battlefield and move the spoils. Their absence would not have a particularly big impact on their combat effectiveness. So, on the battlefield, a very strange scene appeared. The surrounded soldiers and Roland's soldiers confronted each other, while on the side, Roland's soldiers were gathering the militia one by one in an orderly manner. However, this delicate peace did not last long. After suppressing the militia that was running around and slashing in the camp and ensuring that all the militia were killed and honest, the soldiers surrounding the last group of enemies also moved. Under the gaze of the enemy's low-level knights, the golden soldiers surrounding them took out spears one by one, and then threw them hard at the enemy in front. Although the outermost soldiers among the surrounded soldiers held up large shields, these sturdy large shields were quite limited in effect in front of the spears. The spear went straight through the shield and the soldier holding the shield. Finally, after going through several more soldiers, it stopped. The ordinary soldier looked at the spear that had pierced through his comrade and stopped in front of him, with the spear head completely broken, and the screams that came from all directions at the same time. His right hand trembled uncontrollably, and the weapon in his hand fell uncontrollably. It was just an ordinary attack, but they suffered heavy losses. Just when the ordinary soldiers were frightened, the golden soldiers did not stop there. They also drew their daggers and began to attack, closing the encirclement step by step. Although the ordinary soldiers did not react, the first-level knights and second-level knights were not so easily frightened. Although they were surprised by the power of the golden soldiers, they still moved quickly. When the golden soldiers quickly defeated the ordinary soldiers in the encirclement like cutting melons and vegetables, several first-level knights and second-level officers with their guards came out from the core of the encirclement. They had no intention of turning the tide of the battle, and allowed the enemy to massacre their own soldiers. They concentrated their forces, found a direction and began to try to break through the encirclement. It was obvious that they were going to run away. Standing on the mountain, Roland looked at them preparing to run away and silently prepared a spell. If they were successfully broken through, Roland would take action and take them down, and then directly read their memories, confirm the forces behind them, and directly lead 7,000 soldiers to kill. However, looking at the golden waves gradually surrounding him from all directions, Roland felt that he probably didn't need to take any action. Chapter 177. And the fact is exactly as Roland thought. A few soldiers fighting alone cannot fight against Roland's army. Moreover, not all of Roland's 7,000 soldiers are knight attendants. There are also first-level knights. There are currently 15 first-level knights. In terms of quantity, Roland has an absolute advantage. In addition, in terms of equipment, the equipment made of golden bark also gives them an advantage in equipment. In terms of skills, although they have less, their skills are the same, and the power they can burst out when they join forces will not be bad. Except for a second-level knight, the opponent has no advantage. Under this advantage, these soldiers who wanted to break through and escape did not even last for a minute before they were captured by the surging golden waves. A war that was crushed throughout the whole process ended. More than 1,000 enemies were killed, more than 3,000 were captured, and all the enemy's extraordinary knights were also captured. On Roland's side, except for a few who were unlucky and were hit by the skills of the second-level knights on the opposite side, and were knocked away, with several pits on their bodies and some injuries, the rest of the soldiers were basically unharmed. The defense of the equipment Roland provided them was still too superb for this era. Ordinary swords and knives could not leave even a trace on them. Even for extraordinary people, ordinary slashing was useless. Only skills could cause damage. Roland was a little surprised about this result. He thought that the extraordinary knights on the opposite side could kill a few of his soldiers if they fought desperately. As a result, when he came over and prepared to revive and pull people back, he learned the specific situation of the results from the officers. It was too outrageous that no one died in the battle. Where did these knights come from? They surrendered without any results. Roland sat on a relatively intact chair in the camp, looking at the tied enemy knights in front of him expressionlessly, and on both sides of the tent, 6 first-level knights stood beside him in full armor, staring at them covetously. Outside the tent, the soldiers were cleaning the battlefield and collecting prisoners, making some noise, but inside the tent, it was strangely quiet. Originally, he was going to look through their souls after death, but who knew that they were so cowardly that they surrendered directly. However, since they surrendered, Roland couldn't just kill them and extract their souls, so he planned to torture them, but the only problem was, Roland was not good at speaking, and he was even worse at torture. After a moment of silence, Roland looked at the knight who was already sweating in front of him and felt a little bored. Forget it, he didn't know how to torture, and the enchantment spell was risky, so he might as well extract the soul directly. At most, he would just be careful. Moreover, even if it was accidentally damaged, with the knight's self-healing ability, it would be able to recover by itself in a month or two. Thinking of this, Roland met their sight, and with a mental disturbance, he knocked them all to the ground. After they all fell to the ground, the first-level knight close to Roland looked at him, made a gesture of wiping his neck, and said, "Did you take them all down and bury them?" "No need." Roland shook his head and walked to the knight lying on the ground. Then, he pressed on the head of the only second-level knight, extended his mental power into it, and carefully explored his soul memory. He glanced at the previous memories of the second-level knight. There was nothing worth noting. He was just a descendant of a knight born in a small manor. Roland directly focused on his memories of the past few months. Through the memories of the past few months, Roland confirmed the invading force. The one who attacked Roland was a small force in the south, which also occupied the city. However, the control area of this small force is much larger than Roland's. In addition to a main city that is slightly larger than the original Old Chi, there is also a slightly smaller city, and it also controls more than a dozen towns of different sizes, as well as all the villages under these towns. Moreover, compared to the completely collapsed old Qi city, which is almost unwanted and regarded as a negative asset, their control area is much better. They can basically maintain basic order, and the output is relatively stable, which is a positive asset. If we only count the power on paper, the other side is much stronger than Roland. But Roland has the final say on Juki's side, while the situation on the other side is much more complicated. The internal struggles can be clearly felt through this second-level knight, and it is impossible to concentrate on invading Roland. The reason why there are so many militias among these thousands of soldiers is not that there are no extraordinary soldiers, but that the internal struggles have prevented his superiors from mobilizing more soldiers for him. Although even if they can concentrate their forces to invade Roland, Roland is not afraid. At most, there will be more than a dozen low-level knights and a few thousand ordinary soldiers. After understanding the general situation, Roland released his soul and retracted his mental power. Roland clapped his hands, stood up calmly, and said lightly, "Take them all back to Juki and lock them all up." After speaking, Roland cast a spell into the bodies of every knight on the ground, sealing their power. Yes. The first-level knights on the side responded in unison, and then took away all the knight prisoners who were lying on the ground. After taking the knight prisoners away, the soldiers also accelerated the speed of cleaning up the battlefield. Since there was nothing worth taking away on the battlefield and there was a shortage of manpower, many things in the enemy camp were directly piled up and stored in the camp, and then people were transferred from Juki to move them back. After spending some time cleaning up the battlefield, Roland's army was divided into two parts. On one side, 500 soldiers escorted all the prisoners back to Juki as labor, and on the other side, Roland led all the remaining soldiers to fight back along the road where the enemy came. While Roland led his army all the way south, on the other side of Roland's control area, Hela also successfully ended the attack of the enemy. Standing on an open space, Hela calmly looked at the dejected prisoners thrown into the open space by the soldiers, and said coldly, "Tell me, which force sent you here?" Although the prisoners on the ground were all dejected, they remained silent in the face of Hela's questioning. No words. Hela walked in front of them, grabbed one of them by the head, and injected negative energy into it. As the negative energy was injected, the person Hela grabbed trembled all over, and finally, he couldn't hold it back and wailed in pain. Ah! She wouldn't search the soul directly like Roland did, so Hela could only choose a more troublesome operation. On the side, 1,000 soldiers in black armor watched Hela's actions calmly. Chapter 178. The collapse of the Middle Kingdom was almost a devastating blow to Donner. The green-skinned orcs were destroyed like a tide, devouring everything they saw. Countless night kingdoms were destroyed and destroyed, even those located in the west that had not been invaded by the green tide. Countless knights came from the east. The refugees, and the green-skinned warlords who chased them, quickly defeated them. Donner's knightly rule that lasted for countless years was completely shattered by an extremely brutal method of violence. Even after the united army was established on the ruins of the Night Kingdom and successfully defeated the mobile greenskin warlords, it re-established its rule over the currently controlled area. However, the rule of the knights that lasted for countless years has completely collapsed. Even if the Union Army retakes these control areas, the heavy military pressure of the Green Tide, the turmoil in various places, and the internal political chaos also make it difficult for the Union Army to re-establish an effective rule. However, there will never be a vacuum in power, it will only shift. When the coalition forces were unable to establish effective rule, the uncontrolled power in various places naturally flowed into local forces in various places. Wandering knights fleeing from the east, army commanders, local knight families and nobles, warlords and chambers of commerce with armies, adventure groups, mercenary groups and speculators from Sinner. They all invariably occupied power in various places, quickly ending the short-term vacuum period of power. In this regard, the Union Army can only turn a blind eye. Except for some areas that can be firmly controlled by them, the remaining areas that cannot be controlled by radiation can only be allowed to govern themselves. As long as they pay taxes, they don't care who is in charge. Therefore, although the area controlled by the coalition forces seems to be quite large, except for a few core areas, the rest of the areas are basically local autonomy. If it weren't for the existence of the Green Tide, the United Army would have split into countless warlords, large and small. Although it is no different from separatist warlords now, all parties on the front line join forces to fight against the Green Tide, while the local forces in the rear, in addition to providing limited support, are also constantly conquering each other, fighting openly and secretly, and annexing each other. It can only be said that the situation in the rear is like this. All parties on the front line only need to devote themselves to the battlefield, fight against the green tide, and fight the enemy hard, but the forces in the rear have many things to consider. For example, how to invade and annex the neighboring country, expand one's own power, how to exploit civilians more efficiently, how to find excuses to cut support for the front line, and transfer more wealth to Siner. In short, in today's Donner, conquests and annexations by local forces are commonplace and not a rare thing. As long as they don't commit massacres in the city and are discovered by others and make the matter a big deal, basically no one will take care of it. Therefore, after learning about this situation, Roland did not hesitate at all and led more than 6,000 soldiers under his command directly to the enemy's second largest city, Green Grass City. Kinko City is a city with a large area of grassland. Due to its terrain and sufficient resources, the livestock industry in Kinko City is relatively developed, and there are several large horse farms. In the past, Green Grass City could export a large number of ordinary horses and war horses every year, and was a very important source of military resources. Even after experiencing the ravages of the Green Tide, Green Grass City's livestock industry suffered huge damage, and several large horse farms also suffered heavy losses. Green Grass City, which can still produce horses stably, is still very important to the Union Army. Therefore, the forces that control this city also value Green Grass City. Therefore, when Roland led his soldiers to fight straight towards Kinko City, which had a certain amount of horse resources, also immediately received the news. In a study room in a large courtyard in Green Grass City, a man in gorgeous clothes sat on a chair and listened casually to the news about Roland's invasion. Isn't it just 6,000 infantry? There is not a single knight, so there is nothing to be nervous about. After hearing the report from his subordinates, he glanced at the business plan on the table and said with disdain. What are the names of the two wizards who came from the west? Roland and Hela, right? He put down the pen in his hand, looked at the subordinate in front of him, and said. Except for the two of them, the rest are probably just make-up. What can be produced in 3 months, no matter how beautiful it is just a look-alike. Although he had never seen the appearance of these more than 6,000 soldiers, he still made a decision with great confidence. In this regard, his subordinates also felt that he was right. Although they heard all kinds of praise about the soldiers from the patrol, Roland and Hela both went to Juki with bare hands. How could they not only develop Juki in just 3 months, but also develop it prosperously? Can we still pull out an elite force? He picked up the business plan on the table and nodded with satisfaction. Although Donner was in a mess now, it was also a great opportunity to make a lot of war fortune. He definitely couldn't give up such a good opportunity. After formulating the business plan, he casually gave instructions without even looking at his subordinates. However, if the advance team can be eliminated, the two wizards still need to pay more attention to it. Let's ask Lonnie to bring 1,000 soldiers over to make up the numbers. Tell him not to rush too far and let others consume the magic power on the opposite side first. Yes. The subordinate nodded and responded, then quietly and slowly exited the room. At the same time as they made the decision, the various forces that jointly ruled Kinko City also made similar decisions in various parts of Kinko City. No matter how they fought internally, they still understood that they had to unite externally. Therefore, you contributed some people, I contributed some people, and soon, an army of more than 20,000 people was formed in Kinko City in a mess, and they marched towards Roland. However, although this army seemed to have a lot of people, the real core combat power was only 5,000 soldiers and a dozen extraordinary people sent by several forces. The remaining more than 13,000 people were ordinary conscripts and coolies, and they didn't even have weapons. In addition to these soldiers who were going to fight, the rest were all kinds of people from the service industry, caravans, circuses, male prostitutes, female prostitutes, or some messy small businessmen. The whole army was extremely noisy as soon as they went out, with all kinds of sounds mixed together. Those who knew it were clear that they were going out to fight, and those who didn't know thought something exciting had happened. Chapter 179. Since they didn't take Roland seriously at all, this army of more than 20,000 people was noisy and slowly attacked Roland's direction. Due to the general environment, the few scouts sent out would pretend to patrol the surroundings at first, and then they would be impatient to rejoin the army. Later, these scouts were even unwilling to run once, and they didn't care about the orders. They ran outside to find a place to lie down and sleep, and then went back to make up something and handed it in. Therefore, Roland almost easily locked and approached them. Roland looked at the noisy and dragging army that turned into a long straight line, and he was speechless. No wonder when he was reading the memory of the second-level knight before, he was still very confident and thought he was a talented officer who was not appreciated. Indeed, he could lead thousands of soldiers to march normally, set up camp, and set an example by not bringing male prostitutes, female prostitutes, or circuses, which was already very good. At least, compared to this bunch of trash, it's already strong. Insane. Roland shook his head, feeling a little emotional. Because of the plot in his previous life, his filter for Donner was too high. Compared to the bloody expedition launched to seize Donner after Gun Ozu was killed in his previous life, the exiled Donner people regrouped and launched Donner. These guys are still too bad. Have the traditional knights of Donner now even forgotten the ability to fight? Of course, there is also a possibility that the capable knights go to the front line to fight the Green Tide, and the ones in the rear are a bunch of iron trash who eat and wait to die. It should be the latter. If it's the former, Roland has to wonder how the coalition army hasn't been flattened by the Green Tide. Forget it, it's a good thing that they are bad, so that he can expand more easily. While thinking, Roland also micromanipulated the army and prepared for battle. Under Roland's command, the Golden Soldiers formed a military formation, marched in a uniform pace, and appeared directly in the enemy's field of vision. When the enemy saw Roland's situation at the front, they were caught off guard and were also a little confused. Soon, this chaos spread, and the sudden encounter with the enemy made the unprepared 20,000-man army in chaos. Roland commanded the soldiers to stop advancing, looking at the messy enemy with an expressionless face, and he couldn't help but have some doubts in his heart. Does beating this kind of trash really have the effect of training soldiers? Won't it have a counter effect? No way. It shouldn't be. Looking at the increasingly chaotic enemy army, Roland's heart was more shaken. However, the enemy army did not let Roland down completely. After receiving the news, the extraordinary knights who led the army stood up and began to command the army, trying to maintain order. After Roland and his soldiers watched silently for a full 20 minutes, the 20,000 enemy troops in front of them finally gathered into a circular formation. It's finally over. After watching the chaotic gathering of the enemy troops, Roland complained in his heart, and finally breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he issued an order to attack. After receiving the order, the soldiers who had been waiting for 20 minutes also moved quickly. Although they were all infantry because there were no horse resources in the old Qi city, they had all received high-intensity training, and their equipment was all bark, which was relatively light, so they ran fast. The Golden Soldiers were divided into small teams in an orderly manner, and then each team turned into a sharp blade and killed straight through the opposite army formation. The enemy soldiers blocking the Golden Soldiers had no power to resist at all. Whether they were recruited cannon fodder militia or ordinary soldiers, the Golden Soldiers only needed to swing their short swords to easily harvest their lives and tear open the fragile defense line they built. The speed of the Golden Soldiers' breakthrough was limited only by their charging speed. Under Roland's micromanipulation, the teams of Golden Soldiers were like an elite scalpel, accurately and quickly dividing and encircling more than 20,000 enemy troops. Under the ruthless killing of the Golden Soldiers, the 20,000 enemy troops collapsed after only less than a minute. Although ordinary people could not stop the Golden Soldiers' advance, the enemy's extraordinary people would not just watch. A first-level knight stood up, riding a warhorse, wearing armor, holding a spear, emitting light, like a sharp arrow, charging straight towards the nearest Golden team. As for the friendly forces blocking him, they could only admit that they were unlucky and were hit to death. Facing the charging first-level knight, the team did not panic. They ignored the militia and ordinary soldiers who were afraid of being killed around them, and looked at the first-level knight together. They smashed the bottom of their shields on the ground, forming a small shield wall. Weak power emerged from each shield and quickly connected together. Then, they raised their daggers and used the same technique together. Technique, slash. Rays of light emerged from the daggers, and after they swung the daggers, they turned into sharp sword beams and rushed out, and quickly merged into a large sword beam, rushing towards the first-level knight. Facing the sword beams rushing over, the first-level knight also roared, and the light on his body became brighter. Bang! When the sword light collided with the First-Order Knight, the strong wind and waves directly blew away the soldiers around him, and the First-Order Knight's charge was forcibly stopped, and he stood there dizzy. Before he could recover, he heard another burst of sound. He raised his head hesitantly, and what he saw was a spear glowing with red light. Hiss bang! The 7 spears tore through the knight's armor, successfully penetrated his body in different places, and knocked him off his horse. After killing several soldiers along the way, the First Order knight was nailed to the ground by these 7 spears. After killing him, the Golden Team did not stay in a daze. They raised their shields again and continued to advance without even looking at him. After this first level knight was killed, the remaining extraordinary knights who jumped out were easily strangled by the golden soldiers one by one. After killing 5 or 6 First Order knights, the remaining extraordinary knights no longer dared to jump out, not to mention the other soldiers. They had been defeated long ago and did not dare to resist. If the golden soldiers hadn't divided and surrounded them all, they would have run away long ago. The battle lasted less than 10 minutes and ended in less than 10 minutes, which was not as long as it took Roland to let them organize the army. Chapter 180. Under the threat of the golden soldiers, all of the 20,000 or so defeated enemy troops chose to surrender without exception. The soldiers dropped their weapons and knelt down tremblingly, and the miscellaneous personnel who followed the army also knelt down one by one when they saw the murderous look of the golden soldiers. Among the countless people kneeling down, the extraordinary knights who were still standing stood out very prominently. Several teams close to the extraordinary knights looked at them. What, you don't want to surrender but still want to resist? Looking at the extraordinary knights, they all came over with their knives sharpened. However, as they approached, the extraordinary knights who were still standing finally couldn't hold back. They had originally planned to put on airs and wait for Roland to come and persuade them to surrender in person, but seeing Roland who didn't move at all and the golden soldiers who kept approaching, they still panicked. An extraordinary knight was pushed out by them. He looked in the direction of Roland, mustered up his courage, and spoke loudly. "Sir Wizard, we will unload our weapons, but we demand treatment that matches our status." Hearing his words, the approaching golden soldiers were also disappointed, as were several soldiers holding spears and preparing to attack them quietly. They could only continue to observe quietly. However, although the soldiers were a little disappointed, they still remained vigilant. Several approaching teams stopped and stared at the enemy in front of them silently. On the periphery, Roland, who heard their words, also raised his head slightly and looked at them calmly. Looking at their eyes that were still full of dissatisfaction and pride, Roland said calmly, "Put down your weapons, surrender unconditionally, or die." Roland was not interested in playing the unspoken rules between nobles with them. Prisoners are prisoners. Either surrender or die. Why say so much nonsense? According to the previous rules of the Game of Donner, nobles will not be killed by default. Even if they are defeated and captured, they will still be treated as they should be. If they are of higher status, they will be provided with good food and drink. However, the Order of Donner had long been destroyed by the Green Tide. Now Donner has long entered a turbulent era without order. The open rules have been shattered, not to mention these unspoken rules. Moreover, if Roland does not wipe them all out physically, how can he successfully take over Green Grass City? He is not interested in ruling Green Grass City with this group of insects. After conquering Green Grass City, Roland will still start a massacre. Roland never intended to follow the traditional rule of Donner. In Roland's plan for Green Grass City, there is no place for hereditary nobles and knights. Officials directly appointed by Roland will replace them in Green Grass City. Feudal aristocratic hierarchy? No. Centralization? Okay. Maybe when Roland needs to unite some powerful knight nobles in Donner in the future, he may compromise in order to unite all forces to fight against the Green Tide. But, at least now, a noble in Green Grass City will not be taken seriously by Roland, let alone any compromise he makes. As Roland finished speaking, the soldiers surrounding the extraordinary knights started moving again. They struck their shields with short swords, stopping after 3 strikes. The uniform sound shook the battlefield, and then they advanced in the direction of the extraordinary knights. As the golden soldiers kept approaching, the group of extraordinary knights finally gave in. After witnessing how other extraordinary knights were killed by the golden soldiers' simple and unpretentious combos, the timid ones had long lost the courage to fight. They got off their horses one by one, put down their weapons, raised their hands, and squatted in place honestly. In the last stubbornness, they still did not kneel on the ground like other soldiers. However, since they surrendered, Roland would not kill the prisoners. After sealing their power, they were directly treated as ordinary prisoners. After the battle, Roland assigned 2,000 soldiers to control the 20,000 prisoners and commanded them to simply clean up the battlefield. At the same time, Roland randomly selected a lucky person from all the captured extraordinary knights and reconfirmed the situation in Kinko City. After the captives collected all the bodies and Roland burned them, Roland led his army and 20,000 captives to conquer Kinko City again. Because Roland did not attack the enemy directly when they were marching, but attacked directly from the front, giving them enough time to gather together. Therefore, Roland used a small number of troops to defeat the large number of troops and wiped them all out without a single person escaping. Moreover, as a region where knights are the mainstream, communication tools are also quite expensive and rare in Donner. At least, the enemy army that Roland wiped out did not have any. Therefore, Kinko City was completely unaware of this battle and its outcome. When Roland arrived in front of Kinko City with his army, Kinko City was not only unprepared, but even when they saw the captives driven by the golden soldiers, Kinko City thought they were their own people and took the initiative to open the gate. Obviously Roland and his thousands of golden soldiers were so conspicuous. Riding on a captured warhorse, Roland looked at the wide-open city gate, raised his head and glanced at the few soldiers on the city wall who were guarding their posts but gambling and having fun. He really didn't know what to say. He felt that it was unnecessary for him to be so cautious and lead the team here in person. He kept his face tense and watched in silence as the gatekeepers drove the pedestrians out of the gate and helped him clear a passage into the city. Roland sighed deeply and didn't want to say anything. He waved his hand silently. He actually came to attack the city and didn't intend to deceive the city, but since they took the initiative, he could only accept it with peace of mind. Then, the soldiers filed in from both sides of him. With the door open to welcome them, they easily broke through the defense of Kinko City and entered the city. With the whole city unprepared, the golden soldiers once again divided into small teams. According to the map that Roland had searched from other people's memories, they quickly took over the city hall, granary, arsenal, traffic arteries, and other important buildings. Because the golden soldiers came aggressively and the golden equipment on their bodies was not easy to mess with. Therefore, they took over important buildings smoothly without even being questioned. It was not until they began to surround the local forces in Kinko City and began to attack that the guards of the local forces discovered something was wrong, questioned them, and then a fight broke out. Soon, fierce battles broke out at the headquarters of various local forces in Kinko City.